841 Keeping each other in check plus, turn off reset. What terrifying intuition. Despite not realizing that the German sparrow in front of you is a double, you still feel that something is amiss. Hidden in a faraway building, Klein inwardly drew a gasp. His mind raced as he quickly came up with a corresponding strategy. He controlled Senor and made the marionette reply in a deep voice, I'm also a little worried. After opening the door, if you leave first, you can ambush me from the outside once I'm out. You don't even need to ambush me. You can just wait outside. I believe that I should be the first to leave. And before that, you need to return to me my flesh and hair. When the time comes, you can be closer to the door. This way, you will have enough time to pass through the door before your spirit body threads drift to the top of the cathedral. Panatia listened in silence and returned with a question, then how do I prevent you from destroying the door after you leave? This is also a problem for me, the marionette answered without giving any signs of weakness. When I obtain that special symbol, I'll show it to you. That way, even if I close the door, you will still be able to open it again. Panatia closed her mouth as though she was thinking through the details, but she appeared somewhat irascible and could hardly compose herself. It was as though her inclination for insanity had filled her mind. After about 10 seconds, she said again, I think a pure curse might not be able to harm you. Seers do not lack the means to avoid harm, just like the paper figurine substitutes you used before. She really isn't leaving behind any loopholes. Thankfully, the person in front of you is a fake from top to bottom. As Klein lampooned, he made Senor take out one paper figurine after another. Then, he burned them all in front of the demoness of despair. I can't be sure that you haven't hidden one, Panatia said in suspicion, still somewhat neurotic. German Sparrow twitched the corners of his mouth in a deadpan manner and said, you can try divination. Aren't witches good at that? Panatia smiled impatiently and said, the spirit world cannot be communicated within here, and my spirituality. She didn't finish her sentence as the look in her eyes turned somewhat dangerous. Klein knew what the demoness of despair was getting at. Her spirituality had been corrupted due to half a year of eating. It was somewhat chaotic and crazy, making it give unreliable answers, especially against a beyonder that was best at divination. The two reached a stalemate, momentarily unable to resolve the problem of trusting one another. At this moment, on the roof to the left, a hoarse and muffled voice sounded. I can be your witness. German Sparrow and Panatia turned their heads at the same time and looked over. Mr. A's figure grew out from the shadows as he wore a blood-red hooded robe. How will you bear witness? Klein made Senor ask. Mr. A pulled down his hood and said with a deep chuckle, I'll use flesh and blood magic to drill into your body and control your condition. Once you stop controlling the spirit body threads, or if you try to use paper figurine substitutes, I'll immediately give a warning or attempt to stop you. Once that door you speak of opens, I'll leave your body and pass through the door before my spirit body threads are affected. Do you think German Sparrow is an idiot? Klein made his marionette curl his lips. Based on what I know, rose bishops can hide in the bodies of others, but the host will immediately die once they leave. No, using that method is to evade investigations, therefore, there's a need to fuse with the host's flesh and blood. But there's no need to do so in this situation. I'll silently wait inside your stomach, Mr. A explained in detail. No, it's not my stomach. It's in your stomach. Klein made German Sparrow take out a gold coin and pretend to attempt a divination. This crazy adventurer muttered under his breath as the gold coin in between his fingers was flipped. With a ping, the gold coin flew into the air and landed in his palm. German Sparrow carefully glanced at it. From the looks of it, you aren't lying. However, you will have to leave my body before I show the special symbol to Lady Despair. If this wasn't done, German Sparrow might end up being murdered by their collusion. After all, if Panatia obtained the door-opening symbol while wielding the obsidian rock, given enough time, she didn't need to worry about any anomalies with her spirit body threads. Then, she wouldn't need help from German Sparrow at all. Mr. A's existence was only to prevent the use of paper figurine substitutes. However, Gehrman Sparrow didn't need to be too worried if Mr. A came out ahead of time. He wasn't even afraid that Panatia would lose decorum after knowing the door-opening symbol, because if that happened, he could rely on paper figurine substitutes to avoid certain death. On the other hand, Panatia wouldn't carry out a pursuit in the cathedral. This was because she would end up being hung up with the passage of time, hence, she needed to seize the opportunity to escape immediately. Besides, there was no way to take the obsidian rock. Gehrman Sparrow would then have no chance of any subsequent escape attempts. Although the details of this plan were still flawed, it fully considered the situation of all three parties. Panatia raised her hand and grabbed at the hair that was sliding down her sideburns when she suddenly asked, "If I were to escape first, aren't you afraid that I'll ambush you?" This was also a problem that Gehrman Sparrow was previously worried about. Klein immediately made his marionette curl his lips and say, "I'm afraid. But I still have other means of escape. I'll take the risk." Panatia took 2 steps in an irritated manner before finally saying, "We shall do it as agreed then." After making up her mind, her smile became extremely relaxed. "You really are a special man, a man that made me see hope. After we leave, I don't mind letting you experience what extreme pleasure is if you aren't afraid." Gehrman Sparrow shifted his gaze away with great effort before looking at Mr. A. "I have no more questions." With the sound of howling wind, Mr. A flew down and landed not far from Gehrman Sparrow. His figure, along with his clothes, rapidly melted away, turning into a sticky glob of flesh and blood. Right on the heels of that, the flesh and blood piled onto one another and kept compressing into a tiny stream that had the thickness of an arm. Then, it flowed towards Gehrman Sparrow. Far away in a building, Klein felt somewhat disgusted as he retched. Then, he made Gehrman Sparrow open his mouth. The flesh and blood stream climbed up the marionette's body and drilled into its mouth. The slightly warm but slippery feeling passed through the gullet and entered the stomach. "It's heavy." However, Mr. A's flesh and blood is helping to hold up the stomach, preventing it from sagging too much. Klein inspected the marionette and made him look up at the shrouded crimson moon and say to Panatia, "Let's begin." "All right." Panatia, who could hardly withstand her urges, impatiently walked towards the cathedral's entrance. Klein made Gehrman Sparrow follow by her side and first plucked off his hair before making 2 meat tendrils grow out from his arm before ripping it out. It made blood gush out. If someone very familiar with me were here, they would definitely notice a problem because I can't deal harm to my own body so decisively. Perhaps in the eyes of others, the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, can probably do such a deed easily. As Klein noticed a problem and gained experience from his conclusion, he made the marionette pass through the ajar main door of the ancient cathedral. He then handed the hair and flesh to Panatia. Panatia slowed down her pace as she took out an ugly, palm-sized puppet and wiped the flesh over it and tied the hair around its thin neck. She held the cursed puppet in one hand and finally stepped through the cathedral's door. Klein immediately got Gehrman Sparrow to control their spirit-body threads. As for Mr. A, as he had overlapped with the marionette, it wasn't too much of a hassle. Even I can do it. With the powers showcased by Zeradol, he totally has the capability to help Beyonders that are not from the seer pathway to resolve the loss of control over spirit-body threads in the cathedral. This way, as long as he wants the Demoness of Despair to enter, he could have opened the door a long time ago. Why didn't he do it? He is unable to communicate with others beyond the cathedral? That's why seer pathway Beyonders who aren't marionettists or higher can't walk to him. Klein used his marionette senses to analyze the situation remotely. And inside the cathedral, the corpses remained dangling in midair. Their heads were bowed and their eyes were rolled back. From time to time, they would sway with the wind, producing the ravings hornaces. Phlegria. When Panatia saw this scene, her body instantly stiffened, but she quickly composed herself. Together with Gehrman Sparrow, they walked under the gazes of the hanged. Before long, they saw the pitch-black altar and the statue of the ancient god's descendant. Zeradol remained sitting diagonally behind the statue, wearing a hood and sporting a white beard. When Gehrman Sparrow and Panatia approached, he slowly lifted his head and chuckled. Very good. Beyonders from the seer pathway need to know how to use their brain and not always think of fighting. He seemed to have foreseen that all of the paper figurines of Gehrman Sparrow would be destroyed. He directly reached out his wrinkled palm and grasped at something. His grab pulled out a yellowish-brown goatskin and a quill filled with ink and a bottle of ink. This made Panatia involuntarily twitch her brows. Zeradol picked up the quill and scribbled words and symbols before rolling it up and handing it to Gehrman Sparrow. That's the door-opening symbol, as well as the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula you want. They can only last for 45 minutes and cannot be taken out. Klein avoided the demoness of despair and unfolded the goatskin, allowing the potion formula and the door-opening symbol to appear before his eyes. Suddenly, his pupils constricted and nearly froze. The door-opening symbol and the symbol provided by the Antigonus family's notebook via the misfortune cloth puppet were mostly the same. It was a vertical eye made up of many mysterious labels. However, there were tiny differences in the details. A crescent pattern had switched spots with a dotted line label. At that instant, the first thought that surfaced in Klein's mind was, as expected, Zeradol has a ploy. Right on the heels of that, he was thankful that he had obtained the correct door-opening symbol from the Antigonus family's notebook ahead of time. With this newfound confidence, he didn't panic and become at a loss. Zeradol returned the quill and ink bottle to the past, and he lifted his head. Scanning Gehrman Sparrow and Panatia, he said with a sigh, all the conditions are in place. You can now open the door. Upon saying that, he fixed his gaze on Gehrman Sparrow and chuckled. Don't forget to take my urn with you. Just as he said that, his entire body suddenly crumbled into countless points of light and scattered into the surroundings, fusing into the void. It was as though he had long rotted and turned to dust. Left in the spot where he was sitting, there was a tin urn. Its surface had ancient patterns that didn't look anything special. Klein made Gehrman Sparrow take 2 steps forward, bend down, and pick up the tin urn. He found it heavy, nothing like something that was fake. He used the hand holding the goatskin to open the lid and saw that it was filled with grayish-white powder and particles. It didn't have a lustrous glow. It really is just ordinary ashes? Then who helped cremate Zeradol? He cremated himself? After Gehrman Sparrow closed the lid, he casually used this goatskin-wielding hand to take out a piece of flesh from a pocket and swallowed it. Panatia noticed this action as she squinted her eyes at him as though she was asking what he was doing. Klein stuffed the fish into the marionette's mouth as he deliberately adjusted his breathing and said, I'm a little nervous. I'm not sure if this door-opening symbol works. Panatia had already confirmed that he was eating ordinary fish meat. Although it looked somewhat disgusting, the half-crazy her had lacked the patience to make a further distinction. She moved her gaze away and looked at the urn and smiled. If it's useless, we can share it. I'll have 1 scoop a day, and it will last a very long time. This demoness mental state is really abnormal. Klein silently sighed. Passing by the eraser angel statue suspected to be the mother of the sky, Gehrman Sparrow came in front of the wall. Then, he turned his body to the side and pointed to the inset and said to Panatia, place that obsidian rock inside. Panatia smiled gorgeously as she said with dull eyes, let me see the door-opening symbol first. There's no need to be so wary of me. If I really wanted to harm you, I can immediately give up my marionette, and you wouldn't have the time to escape this cathedral. You'll definitely be hung up. When the time comes, I'll saunter in, pick up the obsidian rock, and open the door to leave. However, the symbol given by Zeradol is really problematic. It's best I find a person to bear the brunt of it. Klein's mind whirred as he made Gehrman Sparrow lift his palm and pat his abdomen while opening his mouth. A blob of indistinct flesh and blood surged out, piling up ahead and turning into the beautiful feminine Mr. A. Upon seeing this scene, Gehrman Sparrow flicked the goatskin and unrolled it. The special symbol was with the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula as they were reflected in the eyes of Panatia and Mr. A. Panatia's eyes darted about before she smiled coquettishly and said, open the door. You leave first. She had confirmed that Gehrman Sparrow was still helping her control her spirit body threads, so there was plenty of time for her to wait. As she spoke, she threw the ugly puppet stained with blood and tied up hair at him. She's also afraid of an accident. As Klein got Gehrman Sparrow to catch the puppet, he watched the Demoness of Despair take a few steps forward and insert the obsidian rock into the recess. The two fused together perfectly, not leaving any protrusions. The wall rapidly emitted light and gradually turned transparent. It could be seen that the outside was paved in stone slabs. There were walls with holes and clouds floating in midair. As Panatia took a step to the side, Gehrman Sparrow held the puppet, goatskin, and urn in his left hand and reached out his right palm. He then used his finger as a pen and drew the vertical line made up of several secret symbols on the transparent wall. During this process, Klein was in a dilemma. He wasn't sure if he should draw Zeradol's symbol or the Antigonus family's one. Although he believed that Zeradol was problematic and had a scheme, he felt that he had belittled this powerful figure after calming down. If Zeradol's sole purpose was to harm him and everyone else with him, there was no need for him to mention the opening of the door. All he needed to do was wait patiently to achieve his goals. Furthermore, with the gray fog's aura completely severed and screened from Klein by the foggy town, he couldn't figure out why Zeradol would target him. Therefore, his final judgment was that Zeradol's goal was to coax someone into opening the door to allow him to obtain something or escape something. As for whether there was danger after the door opening, that wasn't within his considerations. If scattering the ashes was genuine and rather important, it was likely to be relatively safe after heading out. In short, danger was at every turn. That also meant that Zeradol's door-opening symbol was real, and the probability that it didn't carry any danger was 50%. And on the other hand, the Antigonus family's notebook wasn't necessarily kind-hearted. The scene that Klein had seen from the divinations he did above the gray fog, and the information he obtained from Zeradol, and the fact that Zeradol had lost control and gone mad, he could basically determine that the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range's Antigonus family's treasure might very well be an enticing trap. Then, whether there was any latent risks in the complex picture provided by the notebook, that was something that needed consideration. On the one hand it's a tiger, and on the other hand it's a wolf. It's the ultimate choice of the lesser evil. Also, the Antigonus family symbol is for entering the treasure trove. It doesn't mean that it can be used to leave. As Klein contemplated, he didn't stop drawing while he quickly approached the part which was different. At this moment, he stole a glance at Panatia and discovered that her eyes had a glint in them as she wore a smile. It felt like she had the urge to try. If she's normal, as a senior instigator, she should be able to control her expressions. Besides, she just saw the door-opening symbol as well. Klein's heart stirred as he let the marionette draw the symbol provided by Zeradol. Soon, the complicated vertical eye was drawn. Pure light enveloped the area as they traversed the patterns and finally gathered together. Amidst a spectacular blast of light, an illusory, double door filled with secrecy appeared on the wall. Due to the push from Gehrman Sparrow, it slowly opened. Behind the door was the ancient stone tiles and hole-ridden walls they had previously seen. Everything was very silent and there were zero abnormalities. At this moment, Panatia's figure suddenly shattered, turning into mirror fragments. At the same time, the lady in a pure white robe appeared in front of Gehrman Sparrow and passed through the door. And in her hand, there was an additional ugly puppet stained with blood, its neck coiled with a strand of hair. As for the one in Gehrman Sparrow's hand, it had degenerated into a piece of glass. In terms of magical illusions, a Demoness of Despair was several times superior to Klein. After Panatia passed through the door first, she half turned around and faced Gehrman Sparrow, revealing a crazy and teasing smile. Black flame soared from her palm as she ignited the puppet. At that moment, it was as though she was saying, "Despair. Plunge into the deepest pit of despair just as hope arrives." Only then did Klein realize that the curse couldn't be diverted or weathered by paper figurine substitutes. Panatia immediately turned around, preparing to depart from the foggy town and the ancient cathedral, afraid that an accident would happen. At that moment, her eyes suddenly froze. Her body crumbled, transforming into one mirror after another. However, she wasn't able to put a distance further than 10 meters between her and the door. In just a second or two, Panatia let out a sharp cry as invisible threads and thick, black hair curled around her, binding her within. Her exterior was covered in black flames as she froze into layers of ice. Suddenly, all of this disintegrated. Demoness of despair. Panatia's eyes effused clear, deep despair and regret. Her expression rapidly turned stiff as her neck seemed to be held up by an invisible hand. Her entire body rose into the air and hung there, her eyes rolling back bit by bit, but her looks remained immaculate. On the side of the door, Gehrman Sparrow's body had been enveloped in black flames and began melting like wax. As for Mr. A, who had planned on flying through the door, he began retching, vomiting one fresh mushroom after another. His body began to sprout mushrooms as if a drizzle had just passed. Before Gehrman Sparrow lost his vision, the scene behind the door pulled close, presenting an empty foyer. No, it wasn't empty. Hanging in midair were even more corpses. They were of all ages and sexes. Some were dressed exquisitely, others gorgeously, ancient, or casually. These corpses were like the ones hanging in the cathedral. They all floated up as they came and went as though they were acting in a grand musical, accurately reflecting a musical of the daily lives and details a town should have. Klein saw that, behind these hanged corpses, there was a transparent and slimy tentacle. It was covered in complex patterns with secrecy hidden within. It was as though it could drive anyone crazy. Countless tentacles extended deep into the foyer, and there sat an ancient, huge stone chair. Its surface was inlaid with dull golden gems. This? Klein tensed up as he didn't hesitate to close his eyes and cut his connection with the marionette. In his mind, the scene that he had seen from his previous divination surfaced. Seated on the huge chair were countless translucent maggots that clustered together. They squirmed slowly as they grew freely, extending out nearly invisible tentacles. And the final scene that was embedded in the marionette's vision was at the bottom of the ancient chair. A tarot card sat there silently. Its surface was also that of Roselle. The emperor was wearing a gorgeous head accessory and colorful clothes. It held a stick with luggage hanging from it as though he was on a long trip. He had a visionary look, and beside him was a puppy. At the corner were shiny words, Sequence 0, the Fool. Sequence 0, the Fool. After discerning the words on the tarot card, Klein once again felt the same feeling he had when he heard Zeradal say his name. At that moment, he felt the strong call of destiny. He felt that everything had been arranged from the beginning, just like 0-08. He began to suspect that his original judgment, believing that the female beast tamer from the traveling circus that had visited Tingen and performed a tarot divination for him wasn't an ordinary person. As his thoughts raced, Klein viewed it from another angle and came up with a new idea. Gradually, he stopped being that horrified, fearful, and depressed. Perhaps it wasn't a machination but the changes that I brought about myself. This is because of the ritual that resulted in my transmigration. I had a connection with the mysterious space above the gray fog. Fate would naturally be affected as a result. More precisely, as a visitor from another world, I never had my fate here. The current trajectory I've taken is a result of my character, the encounters of the original Klein, the influence of the gray fog, and the surrounding environment. The mysterious space above the gray fog is clearly strongly tied to the seer pathway. And this pathway's sequence 0 is the Fool. When projected into reality, and in front of a divination, I'll definitely get the Fool as my card. Similarly, this resulted in me later using the Fool as my name. Klein's mood calmed down bit by bit, believing that this was the most plausible explanation. Using Occam's razor to eliminate all presently unknown factors, I can still obtain a reasonable explanation. That means that it's quite likely to be the case. Klein forced himself to stop thinking about questions he couldn't provide certain answers to. He then turned his attention to what had just happened. That huge chair and that cluster of translucent maggots were what I saw when I made a divination above the gray fog. From carefully considering and inferring things from this harrowing scene, it might very well be an angel from the seer pathway, an angel that had lost control and turned into a monster. Zeradol himself? Or the powerful entity from the Antigonus family from the fourth epic? If it's the former, that corroborates with Erodes and will Septon. Zeradol is already sequence 1 and has lost control and gone mad. He broke down into a monster. This matches. This can also explain why Zeradol only wishes for the door to be opened. It's because once the door of secrets is opened, the two sides will have a connection, allowing him to recover from his present state bit by bit. His repeated emphasis on his ashes was just a pretense. But herein lies the problem. The environment Zeradol is located in, as presented by Erodes, doesn't resemble the ancient palace at the mountain peak. Otherwise, I would have recognized it back then. What if that's the angel from the Antigonus family who's living as an abject existence, one that made Zeradol suffer after he came to the Hornaces mountain range after obtaining the notebook from Roselle? He had a part of him separated from him without realizing it, thus, causing him to go mad during the advancement. Regardless, he is a sequence 1 attendant of mysteries. After all, Zeradol was already a miracle invoker back then. From this angle, Zeradol's goal might very well be the opening of the door, allowing the foggy town's history and fate to become mixed with the outside world, preventing him from being dissociated again. Regardless, that cluster of translucent maggots is probably a sequence 1 that lost control. No wonder the demoness of despair faced a breakdown the moment she saw him. She only managed to struggle a little before being hung up, turning into a marionette that's being hung up to dry. Thankfully, I was lacking in clues back then, and the scenes I saw through divination wasn't clear enough. Otherwise, I would have suffered a terrible blow from witnessing a complete and crazy mythical creature. I would have lost control and mutated. Wait, no matter how strong he is, can he be stronger than the eternal blazing sun and the true creator? Even if a seer pathway beyonder has a certain resistance against the mysterious space above the gray fog, it would at best make them be at the same level. In other words, as long as I endured the pain, with the prerequisites met, I have one chance of prying on its secrets, and a complete mythical creature state is mixed in with the relevant knowledge. Who knows, I might be able to get 1 or 2 high-sequence formulas, just like how I obtained the unshadowed from the eternal blazing sun back then. At this thought, Klein couldn't help but have a scene surface in his mind. The fool above the gray fog was silently reaching out his thieving hands once again. While reeling in joy, Klein also found it a great pity because, with his present level, strength, and items, he had no way to head to the ancient chair with the translucent maggots and pick up the fool card. To see an item that one desired the most but not being able to obtain it was often painful. Phew. At least I've already obtained the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula. In the future, I still have one's chance of prying on its secrets. The risk I took this time wasn't in vain. All the gold pounds I spent and the marionette I lost wasn't in vain either. Zeradol likely wouldn't give a fake formula. To him, there's no need for him to lie to a sequence 5 beyonder who might not walk out alive. Besides, if he was lying, he had to be wary of me already knowing the Bizarro Sorcerer Potion formula. The reason why I asked might only be to determine if he was worth trusting. I'll divine this later when I'm back above the gray fog. Klein heaved a sigh of relief, and seeing that there hadn't been any anomalies outside for quite a while, he decided to immediately approach the pitch-black cathedral and observe the changes inside. To him, all the problems that he thought about weren't pressing issues. The pressing issue was to leave the secret world, to leave this foggy town. When he came out of the building he was in, Klein, who was wearing an ancient triangular hat and dark red coat, carefully came to the entrance of the ancient cathedral. He carefully passed through the ajar door and walked in. The corpses that looked and dressed differently were no different from before. They remained hanging in midair, swaying with the wind and producing the ravings of Hornaces. Phlegria. Klein walked under them as his eyes got accustomed to the dim environment, allowing him to see more. The half-demonic wolf and half-human statue was still standing there without any signs of damage. The obsidian rock and the tin urn were behind the statue without any signs of cracking. Klein first heaved a sigh of relief as he began to observe his surroundings when his gaze froze. In a dark corner stood a gigantic mushroom taller than he was. The mushroom's cap had scarlet red like blood with interspersed white patterns. Its body was formed out of similar tiny mushrooms. Their patterns drew out a face, Mr. A's face. However, Mr. A's eyes were blank. It didn't have the glint that one would call human. There were mushrooms growing from both sides of the stem, forming into long arms. And on the left palm was a thin human-skinned glove. Both parties had seemed to fuse as one. What kind of abomination is that? Klein involuntarily took a step back. He found his knowledge and mysticism completely lacking at that moment in time. He began taking actions to protect himself. While doing so, having not deactivated his corresponding visions, he discovered that the terrifying mushroom didn't have any spirit body threads. It appeared to have long been dead, and its only movements were the results of spasming nerves. Suddenly, Klein had a theory. Mr. A, who had been infested with mushrooms, didn't manage to escape in time and had seen the cluster of translucent maggots. He had seen a complete mythical creature, causing his mind to instantly die as his body collapsed completely. This also resulted in a terrifying mutation. It then merged with Senor, who had disintegrated from the curse, becoming a never-seen-before mushroom monster. Also, creeping hunger has been swallowed. This mushroom is really disgusting. I'll throw Frank into the sea if he ever mentions mushrooms again. Klein's eyes darted around slightly as he subconsciously headed for the obsidian rock. He planned on ignoring the mushroom and first escape. At this moment, he found his mind turning adrift. Everything around him seemed to turn into a blur. Suddenly, Klein realized that he was being forcefully pulled into a dream. He immediately escaped the dream and saw the nearly 2-meter-tall mushroom sliding over slowly. In its hand was a great sword that was a combination of scarlet magma and blue-hot flames. It can use sword of lava. Klein didn't hesitate as he opened his mouth and let out a sound, bang. The extremely penetrative air bullet hit the mushroom, who had slowed down due to it being engaged in controlling dreams. The bullet drilled through its cap, tearing open a huge wound. Underneath the wound was human flesh and tiny spores. They quickly squirmed and restored the body. To think that's possible. Klein felt a strong sense of danger as he hurriedly lunged to the side, rolling several times in the process. The mushroom sped up suddenly as the sword of lava in its hand dragged scarlet and blue flames, cleaving down at the spot Klein had been standing at. It caused the floor tiles to rupture as flames scattered. At this moment, Klein snapped his fingers, igniting the tiny mushrooms that formed the monster. Then, he ran towards the back of the statue in an attempt to obtain the obsidian rock. But finding his thoughts go adrift for a moment, Klein realized that he was going in the wrong direction. He was rushing towards the entrance. It can distort my will? Klein's heart tightened as he noticed through the corner of his eye that the surface of the gigantic mushroom was covered in a layer of frost. The frost had extinguished the soaring scarlet flames. As his thoughts raced, Klein ran towards the door and snapped his fingers, igniting the tree leaves outside. In situations with zero understanding about his enemy, and him having not made any preparations, he believed that a magician had to choose to retreat and avoid dangers for the time being. More importantly, his strongest marionettist powers were useless because the gigantic mushroom didn't have any spirit body threads. Scarlet flame soared up like water, enveloping Klein's body. He quickly appeared in the flames outside as he jumped towards the ground. He was just about to distance himself when he heard a howling wind. The red-capped mushroom had come out of the cathedral with the auspices of a strong gust of wind. It can even fly. Klein snapped his fingers, using flaming jump to open up a gap. Meanwhile, he discovered his nose was itching as he wanted to sneeze. I'm also sick. How am I supposed to fight? I don't have any mystical items, and I haven't been able to fully express my strengths as a marionettist. It really is a magical mushroom. Klein was at a loss on whether to laugh or cry when he hid inside a building. Suddenly, he felt his body become somewhat cold as his mind naturally reflected his present appearance. His ancient triangular hat, dark red coat, white pants, and black boots had vanished. All he had on him was a pair of briefs to uphold his last bit of dignity. This 30 minutes are up. The spell for summoning Senor from the past has ended. Klein instantly understood the reason as he began thinking. That mushroom which fused with parts of Admiral of Blood has likely disappeared as well. Also, in another 15 minutes, the effects of the fish will disappear. It will lack the main element that forms it. Klein couldn't help but curl his lips. He immediately used flames and leaped out. Indeed, as he expected, the gigantic mushroom had a ridiculous hole in part of its stem. Furthermore, it couldn't fix it, causing its speed to slow and become impeded. "Come on, let's play hide-and-seek," Klein silently said as he began circling the town streets, using the flames and buildings to engage in a merry chase with the gigantic mushroom. During this process, the crimson moon didn't turn clear at all. After more than 10 minutes, the terrifying mushroom finally lost its ability to move as it collapsed on the street. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he slowly and carefully approached. He saw that the flesh and blood of the mushroom was gathering together as points of light converged. Soon, all that was left was a thin human-skinned glove. This, because of the mutation brought about by the Sequence 1 angel, Creeping Hunger fused with Mr. A? It's an upgraded version of Creeping Hunger? Klein bent his back as he carefully picked up the human-skinned glove. The thin human-skinned glove didn't look any different from the past, but Klein didn't dare to be too careless. He used divination to make a crude inspection. Apart from the 5 fingers, the palm and the back of the palm can each graze one more soul. Currently, all 7 spots are filled. It has signs of similar Beyonder characteristics fusing together. It also seems to have the powers of flesh and blood magic. The speed of switching souls has sped up significantly. It has to eat a person a day, or else it will eat its owner. Creeping Hunger, you are swelling in self-importance again. You need to reflect on yourself above the grey fog later. I'm temporarily unable to obtain any revelations for the rest. After I leave this place, I'll head above the grey fog to make a more accurate divination. Yes, I'm still not sure if there are any other side effects. All I know is that it wouldn't cause me any harm for the time being. Also, Mr. X who was grazed wasn't affected. Travelers traveling and door opening still work. Klein heaved a sigh of relief as he wore the upgraded Creeping Hunger. Then, he rushed for the cathedral, hoping to leave as soon as possible. During his merry chase with the gigantic mushroom, he hadn't forgotten to cast an illusion on himself to make him wear a trench coat and a top hat. As for the Beyonder characteristic that Senor left behind, Klein suspected that it was likely in the hands of Demoness of Despair Panatia. And this demigod was being hung inside the ancient palace, under the watch of the cluster of maggots. Flesh can be slowly eaten to be stored for the future, but Beyonder characteristics will definitely have appeared and taken form after this much time. Even if Demoness of Despair didn't care too much about it and threw it somewhere, in this place that isn't connected to the spirit world and highly restricts divination, I'm unable to quickly locate it. And in this sort of environment, who knows what sorts of anomalies will happen next? Who knows if that obsidian rock will automatically teleport and disappear? Thus, I need to make every second count and escape as quickly as possible. Klein returned to the cathedral with a clear line of thought. Although he had promised Miss Sharon to sell Senor's Beyonder characteristic to Merrick, the ingredient itself was corrupted to begin with, making it difficult to use for the concocting of a potion. Secondly, his safety was a lot more important. It's not like it cannot be resolved. I can just hunt another wraith or find Will Acceptance help to shatter the Beyonder characteristic in Merrick's hands and allow it to be purified. This will have to wait until a particular infant is born. Klein mumbled silently as he passed through the swaying corpses and came to the side of the stone statue. Along the way, he found the iron cigar case which he had used to put the marionette in. It hadn't been devoured by the mushroom. Azek's copper whistle and the lone gold coin inside weren't damaged either. Putting these items away, Klein controlled his spirit body threads to prevent himself from floating to the top of the cathedral as he bent down to pick up the obsidian rock. After confirming that the important item wasn't damaged, he felt a lot calmer. He then inspected Zeradal's tin urn. When he opened the lid and took a careful look, Klein's pupils constricted as his gaze instantly froze. All the ashes inside were gone. There wasn't any left inside. Zeradol achieved his goal? Should I say as expected? Klein threw away the thin urn while feeling doubtful. He stood up straight and inserted the obsidian rock into the wall at the back. The wall emitted light again as it turned transparent, allowing people to see the ancient stone slabs outside, the hulled walls, and the floating clouds. At the thought of the cluster of terrifying maggots, Klein wasn't in a rush to draw the symbol provided by the Antigonus family's notebook. He first raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. He had ignited a tree outside the cathedral, in preparation to escape with flaming jump the moment something wasn't right. After making his preparations, Klein used his finger and quickly outlined the vertical eye formed of many secret symbols. Compared to the previous one, a crescent and dotted line had swapped places. With his final stroke, the pure beams of light bloomed as they followed the vertical eye's patterns before blasting into a radiant light. The entire cathedral turned ethereal as it shook. Klein felt as though he had instantly arrived at the top where the corpses were being hung. In front of him was a pair of illusory double doors. Behind the door was a familiar ancient palace. It was where Panatia and the other corpses were gently swaying. Translucent tentacles with strange and mysterious patterns swarmed over and slammed on the door but were unable to open it. All it could do was use some of its strength to grab Klein's spirit body threads. Klein didn't hesitate to snap his fingers. While pulling at his spirit body threads, he leaped to the flames outside the cathedral. Right on the heels of that, he snapped his fingers repeatedly and flashed away, escaping to the farthest point of the foggy town. After the ethereal feeling of the pitch-black cathedral vanished, Klein paused and frowned. That also leads to the palace with the rampaging angel. The symbol provided by the Antigonus family's notebook is as much of a trap as Zeradol's was. However, this symbol only seems capable of triggering the door to escape, but it's unable to open it. Otherwise, I might not have been able to escape. It's the symbol for entry, while Zeradol's one was for exiting? What should I do? How do I leave? Klein subconsciously surveyed the ghastly silent town which was shrouded in fog, and he forced himself to calm down. He began to think about how he could escape. Perhaps that's not the only wall that allows me to leave, but it's unlikely. All these years, there have been batches of people coming to the foggy town. If there are any clues outside the cathedral, they should have long found it. Try another symbol? What should I try? Klein fell into deep thought as he analyzed the intricacies to see if he could be inspired. This place is related to the nation of the Evernight and the Antigonus family. As for the monster on the huge throne in the ancient palace, it's definitely a rampaging angel from the seer pathway, regardless of his identity. Zeradol, who's also involved in this matter, is similarly an angel of the seer pathway. The Antigonus family's notebook which provided the symbol is also directly tied to this pathway. Therefore, the correct door-opening symbol is likely related to the seer pathway? Sequence 0 of the seer pathway is likely called the Fool. This can be initially confirmed, otherwise, that owner of the card of blasphemy wouldn't have been lured to the main peak of the Hornacis mountain range and become a hanger. The Fool. The Fool. As he ruminated over the word, Klein suddenly thought of himself. He thought of the mysterious symbol behind his high-backed chair that represented himself above the gray fog. Perhaps I can give it a try? Klein pondered for a few seconds before deciding to make a bold attempt. After all, he was temporarily out of ideas. He returned to the spired cathedral, and under the gaze of the hanged corpses, he walked to the wall behind the statue and picked up the obsidian rock that had fallen once again. After the obsidian rock was inserted, the door rapidly turned transparent. As Klein snapped his fingers to light another tree, he took a deep breath. He drew the Fool symbol that was made up of the pupilless eye and the partially contorted lines. Soon, he completed the symbol as he found himself feeling anxious. But this time, nothing happened to the transparent door. It doesn't work. Klein's expression turned wry as he suspected that he would be trapped in there, engaging in murderous battles with beyonders who later entered, doing so until he starved to death or was eaten. He shook his head to dispel his emotions of despair. He began running through ideas in search of other clues. This place is related to the nation of the Evernight and is related to the Antigonus family, and they were obliterated by the Church of Evernight. The one who sent me here is the Eraser Angel who's suspected to be the Mother of the Sky. She was active in the basement of the Church of Evernight's St. Samuel Cathedral. The reason why people vanish if they don't sleep at night in the ruins of the Battle of Gods is said to be a result of the remnant aura and strength of a deity from the Evernight domain. Therefore, this is clearly related to the Evernight's authority or even the Evernight goddess, areas related to the goddess. The more Klein thought about it, the more he lacked confidence. He was originally analyzing the problem from an objective angle, but he had unknowingly changed the way he addressed the Evernight goddess. And this led him to a new idea. Perhaps I can try the label corresponding to the dark sacred emblem or the symbol that represents the goddess in mysticism? Out of options, Klein exhaled and raised his right hand again, drawing the simplified picture of the dark sacred emblem. Suddenly, the watery scene behind the transparent door shook as a change occurred. Although he could still see the ancient palace and the hole-ridden wall, they were very far away and could only be faintly made out. Behind the door was a bottomless cliff with jagged rocks. It was amidst the clouds in the sky with stars and a crimson moon that hadn't been concealed by the sunlight. It was like some part of a mountaintop. It really works. Klein stared at this scene with a dumbfounded expression as he subconsciously reached out with his palms and pushed the door open. There was a cold breeze outside that produced a howl. Klein was just about to take a step out when he fell into thought and paused. Then, he flipped a gold coin and did a divination. He received a revelation that there was no danger outside. Following that, he drew a crimson moon on his chest in a feigned manner. After doing this, Klein stepped out with his right foot and passed through the illusory door. His vision went dark as he saw an endless night and resplendent stars. Following that, he found himself on a mountaintop. Apart from the unmelted snow, jagged rocks, and morning sunlight, there was nothing. I'm out. I'm safe? Klein didn't observe his surroundings as he directly used creeping hunger to turn transparent as he attempted using traveling. If this succeeded, it would mean that he had escaped the foggy town and returned to the real world. He could then leave the location he was at to avoid any danger. If he were to fail, he would quickly take note of the situation and be wary of any sudden attacks. After a moment, Klein's body turned faint as he vanished from the spot. The colors in front of him saturated as countless, indescribable shadows appeared. He had succeeded in entering the spirit world. It really is the spirit world. Klein was delighted as he inwardly muttered to himself. Without needing further confirmation, his spirituality and spiritual perception had told him that this was the real spirit world. And this meant that he had returned to the real world, the place with all kinds of delicacies. I nearly cried tears of joy. Klein inwardly made a self-deprecating comment as he considered where he was supposed to head to next. From the position of the stars, moon, and sun, it's still morning. If there's no time difference between the real world and the foggy town, it's at most 7:30 a.m., or maybe earlier. At this point, the servants must have discovered the disappearance of their mate, and they would definitely inform the priests and bishops. Even if they have received the corresponding training and would report to their superiors according to the protocol, they will have to first eliminate the possibility that someone was skiving away or having a stomachache. They would need more than 10 minutes before confirming this and begin taking the necessary actions. And after the report to their superiors, the priests and bishops wouldn't be able to instantly tell the severity of the matter. They would only believe that the servant had escaped, and they wouldn't quickly connect this matter to the keepers. After they do a divination or investigation to figure out the truth, it would be 20 to 30 minutes later. That also means that they likely haven't begun their search in the surrounding area to find the intruder. The identity of Dwayne Dantès hasn't been exposed yet. If the bizarre sorcerer potion formula given by Zeradol is real, then the identity of Dwayne Dantès still has many uses. If I can still keep the identity going, I should try harder to not abandon it. Besides, the only things that I'm wearing, which are real, are my glove and underwear. If I head elsewhere, I'll be a pervert. Klein already had a choice he was leaning towards. He took out the iron cigar case, which appeared to be inside his pocket, but was actually lodged under a rubber band. He opened it and took out the gold coin inside. Returning to 160 Buckland Street is dangerous, Klein muttered 7 times, and with a flick, he saw it slowly spin in the spirit world, wobbling up and down, left and right, before landing on his palm. This time, it was tails, indicating a negative response. Klein nodded indiscernibly and immediately traveled towards Backland. After 3 stops, his figure finally appeared in his room at 160 Buckland Street. The curtains were drawn tightly and it was dim. It was very suitable for sleeping. And on the bed, Dwayne Dantès was lying on the bed facing up. His hands were grabbing the ends of the blanket near his neck. From the looks of it, the investigation hasn't reached me. This appearance is ridiculous. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief and saw Dwayne Dantès dissipate and turn into a palm-sized mirror. Water ripples appeared on the mirror's surface as silver light bloomed and turned into Loanese text. Exalted Great Master, did you encounter something? Your loyal and humble servant, Aurora, failed to send you before. It wasn't anything important, Klein answered perfunctorily. This made him confirm that Aurora was unable to pry into the secrets that happened in the foggy town. After all, this fellow was able to present the environment where the rampaging Zeradal was. It really is related to the authorities of a deity? Klein's mind stirred as he asked, did anyone look for me? No, no one came to disturb you. The silver on the mirror's surface changed and produced new words. Klein felt truly relieved as he said to Aurora, you may leave. I'll summon you again if needed. All right, Master. Goodbye, Master. Like before, Aurora produced a drawing of a hand waving on the mirror. After the aqueous light vanished, the mirror was restored to normal. Klein walked to the bedside and pulled out the pajamas underneath and wore it. Then, he took out candles and other items before entering the bathroom. He set up a sacrificial ritual, preparing to send creeping hunger, Azek's copper whistle, the iron cigar case, and the various mysticism materials above the gray fog to avoid any investigations he might face. After doing all of this, Klein didn't delay and sat at the fool's seat. He conjured the Bizarro Sorcerer's potion formula in front of him. Sequence 4, Bizarro Sorcerer. Main ingredient, Bizarro Bane's main eye, the true soul body of a spirit world plunderer. Supplementary ingredients, 200 milliliters of a Bizarro Bane's blood, 30 grams of a spirit world plunderer, 10 grams of red hair birch bark. 1 segment of golden grapevines, fingernail-sized self-made rubber mask. Advancement ritual. Relying on one's strength and strategy, orchestrate a grand performance before many spectators to kill a beyonder creature at the level of a demigod. Then, at the end of the performance, consume the potion. Klein didn't consider what this ritual actually meant. Beneath the potion formula, he wrote a corresponding statement. Following that, he summoned a spirit pendulum from the junk pile. Holding it in his left hand, he began a divination. Before long, Klein opened his eyes and saw the dangling topaz rotating clockwise. This meant that the Bizarro Sorcerer potion formula he had was genuine. Phew. Klein exhaled as he took the opportunity to determine what kind of changes creeping hunger had experienced, as well as what the various negative side effects were. After a dream divination and several direct attempts, he figured out the exact situation in less than 2 minutes. Creeping hunger could now graze 7 souls. During each grazing process, it could obtain 2 or 3 beyonder powers. One of them can be chosen by the wearer. There are currently 8 souls inside creeping hunger. The others completely dissipated from the mutation brought about by the Attendant of Mysteries. And due to the excessive number of souls, it caused a congestion, making some of the powers unusable. 1 soul needs to be released to restore it back to normal. At present, the first of the 8 souls is Baron of Corruption, which is Wormtongue Mither. He fused with the beyonder characteristics of the same pathway that Mr. A had grazed. Apart from distortion and bribe, weaken, there's another area of effect beyonder power called corrosion. It can turn the hearts of people within 10 meters dark and greedy, making them make irrational choices. The second is Desire Apostle Curtius. He fused with Mr. A's Devil and replaced Danger Premonition, which requires advanced activation before being useful, with Sulfur Fireball. And Language of Foulness, Slow and Sword of Lava have been enhanced. Third is Traveler, Mr. X Louis Veen. He fused with Mr. A's Scribe. While keeping traveling and door opening, it has obtained the Beyonder power of record. However, there's a change. It's unable to record ordinary Beyonder powers, and it can only be used against targets at the demigod level. The chance of success has been increased. Although it's still very troublesome, 8 times or so would be needed as long as I'm not too unlucky. In addition, it cannot record more than 2 demigod-level Beyonder powers, and cannot exceed sequence 3. Fourth is Zombie Mavady. There hasn't been any change. It's still the original zombie strength, ice control, and zombie manipulation. Fifth is an unknown Demoness of Affliction. She can give the user a rather powerful sense of charm. In addition, one's appearance would receive an adjustment to a certain degree. In addition, she can provide an ailment that covers 50 meters. Creatures within that range will slowly be infected, and the effects slowly become severe. In the beginning, it might be oversensitive skin, a cold, or a fever. But 20 to 30 seconds later, it might very well turn into serious illnesses like pneumonia. After 2 or 3 minutes, one can suddenly suffer cardiac arrest or a brain aneurysm. Sixth is an unknown wind blast. There are 3 Beyonder powers: short distance flight, dive, and water control. Seventh is an unknown Soul Assurer with the 2 Beyonder powers of forcefully pulling one into a dream and causing a spirit body to sleep. Eighth is an unknown Doctor with the 3 Beyonder powers of distinguishing the time, treatment of serious ailments, and stitching souls. At the same time, Creeping Hunger itself has Shadow Lurking and Flesh Bomb. Furthermore, it has the chance and strength to barely graze a sequence 4 saint. It has instantly become so much stronger. As Klein was secretly delighted, he also frowned at the negative side effects. Now, Creeping Hunger had to eat a living person every day, otherwise it would devour the wearer. At the same time, it would praise the true creator from time to time in the wearer's mind. It would bring about chaotic thoughts and a headache. Apart from those 2, it was also still afraid of mushrooms. No powers could be used if mushrooms appeared within 5 meters of it. To randomly praise the true creator is really troublesome. Same for eating a living person every day. I'll first throw it above the gray fog and let it calm down for a few days. Perhaps there might be some changes. If that really doesn't work, I can only write to Mr. Azek. Klein quickly made up his mind and didn't hesitate to release the Soul Assurer's soul. He also planned on swapping the Windblast and Doctor later. The Demoness of Affliction depended on the circumstances. To the side of the bronze table, the Soul Assurer spirit surfaced. But due to the mutation, it couldn't be maintained once it lost its host. It rapidly dissipated. His Beyonder characteristic was produced. It was entirely black in color. At its core was pure shimmering light that looked like a night sky with embedded stars. After doing this, Klein didn't hesitate to throw Creeping Hunger and the other items into the junk pile. He then quickly returned to the real world, ended the ceremony, and cleared up any traces. Following that, he washed his face and brushed his teeth to make Dwayne Dantès look sharp. After leaving the bathroom, Klein, in his pajamas, walked to the door with his usual expression. He pulled open the door and said to his valet outside, "Prepare a set of clothes that's suitable for home wear." "Yes, sir." Richardson didn't ask why as he immediately walked to the wardrobe. Only at this point, with him seeing his servants back, did Klein confirm that he was out of harm's way and had returned back to his normal life. St. Samuel Cathedral, behind Cheney's Gate. Backland Archbishop, St. Anthony, stood at the staircase connecting the 2 different stories and watched as the Nighthawk deacons rushed about. Many of them wore red gloves. As a spokesperson for the Church of Evernight in the kingdom's capital, St. Anthony had a clean-shaven face. His face didn't betray his mood, and his deep black eyes similarly hid any upheavals he had. But everyone who passed by him would feel their souls tremble as an indescribable sense of horror arose in their hearts. Your Grace, an inventory count has been made. None of the mysticism ingredients are missing, including the potion main ingredients and beyonder characteristics. Your Grace, all the potion formulas are in their original locations. It can be preliminarily determined that no one had gone through them in the last 8 hours. Your Grace, all of the prisoners imprisoned on the first level are accounted for. None of them escaped, nor did anyone pass away. Your Grace, none of the information or books suffered any damage or were moved. Your Grace, the Grade 2 and Grade 3 sealed artifacts are all present. None of them have been taken away. Your Grace, the 3 Grade 1 sealed artifacts remain in their sealed states. None of them show signs of having left their confines. Your Grace, the core seal remains intact and didn't suffer any damage. Your Grace, it has been confirmed that there are no new items in here. There are no remnant setups that bring about danger. Your Grace, we didn't find the enemy who disguised himself as a keeper. He seems to have evaporated into thin air. One deacon after another came over to make a report as the matter gradually turned somewhat odd. They found it unimaginable that a scheming and powerful beyonder would take such an immense risk and set up such a tight plan and use all kinds of means to pass through Cheney's gate. Yet, nothing was taken, and the perpetrator had left after circling the area once. This made it seem like the person was only trying to prove themselves, or it was someone who had specially come to find flaws in the surveillance of Cheney's gate for the church. The deacon who led a Red Gloves team surveyed the area and deliberated as he came up with a theory. Your Grace, could it be the requirements of an advancement ritual of some sequence? Having been on a mission to capture devils, he was accustomed to making such guesses. And from Sequence 5, different pathways and different sequences had different advancement rituals. The ones that the Church of Evernight was aware of wasn't a large number. If that were the case, Soist could already see the infiltrator's mockery grin that said, "I'm free to go anywhere, even if it's the Church of Evernight's Cheney's gate." It's no different from a department store. Those Nighthawks will only become raged after the matter, feeling useless. He has to be caught. Soist silently clenched his red-gloved hand. Saint Anthony was just about to say something when Nighthawk Deacon, Daily Simone, raised a second possibility. Perhaps the infiltrator had attempted to take some sealed artifact away and suffered the negative effects. He died on the spot and was cleanly devoured? Saint Anthony nodded in thought and said, "I'll head to basement 3 to take a look." With that said, he steadily walked to basement 2, and in a secret location, activated the path to basement 3. The other deacons were lacking in rank or clearance, so all they could do was wait in their spots. Saint Anthony quickly arrived at basement 3, which didn't span too big an area. He basically confirmed that sealed artifacts 1 to 29 and 1 to 80 hadn't undergone any abnormal changes. Following the strict protocols, he observed 1 to 80 with 1 to 29 and found 0 to 17 lying inside with eyes half open, just like always. During this process, Saint Anthony approached thrice and opened a distance from it thrice. Sometimes, he changed where he stood, and at other times, he cloaked himself in the darkness of the night. He didn't dare skip the necessary steps. Even as a saint, he didn't dare belittle any of the items in here. Ignoring the powers that would break out of its vessel, temporary causing the seal on 0 to 17, even 1 to 29 and 1 to 80, which were rather dangerous items, to become ineffective. Saint Anthony didn't wish to degenerate into an amnesiac who had to relearn how to eat and drink, much less become part of a dream that existed between reality and illusions. There's nothing wrong. Anthony heaved a silent sigh of relief. He began restoring the 2 sealed artifacts to their original states. A few minutes later, the Nighthawk deacons saw the Archbishop return. The infiltrator might have died from touching a sealed artifact, Saint Anthony said, his pronunciation of died being somewhat muffled. He didn't give any additional explanations as he instructed. Regardless, this matter needs to be investigated. The infiltrator might have a partner. To be able to infiltrate St. Samuel Cathedral without causing a stir, it means that the target is very familiar with this place and is familiar with the recent duty shifts of the keepers. He's very familiar with how Nighthawks handle and take over matters, and has the ability or an item to change his appearance. In addition, he had obtained the help from a Beyonder with a sacred Evernight Pathway item or has one himself. Putting all these conditions together, investigate the servants and priests to see if they have encountered any indistinct spirit channeling or enticement. Check if the bishops have betrayed the goddess, as well as the believers who have recently come to the cathedral on a regular basis. At the same time, check on all the believers and the surroundings of their residences. Perhaps they had unexpectedly divulged something and had something stolen. I'll carry out the investigations pertaining to you. Also, find the missing servant and see if there are any clues. Yes, Your Grace, Soist and the other Nighthawk deacons answered in unison. In the office with a tense mood, Leonard Mitchell wasn't having his feet up on the table like usual. He sat very properly and wore a rather solemn expression. This was the second time he had encountered a matter that targeted items behind Cheney's gate. It invoked the memories that he buried deep inside his heart. And more importantly, he had encountered the fake keeper before without realizing the problem. If I were a little stronger and had better observation skills, perhaps it might not have. Leonard Mitchell's lips pursed tightly as he looked at the documents in front of him, but he wasn't reading a single word. This continued until his teammates entered. That keeper has awoken. He didn't see the infiltrator and only knew that he encountered the possession ability of a wraith, the red glove that entered said to everyone in the room. How can a wraith move about inside the cathedral? Many red gloves raised the question, but no one had an answer. Perhaps that wraith believes in the goddess. Leonard mumbled inwardly. While no one was paying attention to him in the corner, he suppressed his voice and seemed to mutter, "Old man, didn't you discover anything abnormal back then?" The slightly aged voice sounded in his mind. It's not like I'll observe the outside world all the time, especially when I'm near Cheney's gate. Leonard didn't dare ask further as he joined in the discussion with his teammates. Before long, the Red Gloves team captain, Soist, entered the room and threw a stack of dossiers on the desk. These are the targets we need to investigate. The bishops have provided the names of the believers who have frequently come to the cathedral recently. Leonard glanced at it, and towards the back was a dossier with a familiar name, Dwayne Dantès. This old fellow that survived from the fourth epoch came to a nearby street for less than 2 months, and Cheney's gate was infiltrated? Isn't that too much of a coincidence? Besides, he has been frequently coming to St. Samuel Cathedral. He might be observing the situation and figuring out the patterns. Old man's excuse wasn't too convincing, but if the infiltrator was Dwayne Dantès, then everything makes sense. He's afraid that he would expose himself and pretended not to discover anything abnormal. Leonard's mind instantly filled with many ideas as he asked in deliberation, "Captain Soist, what did the infiltrator take? What clues did he leave behind?" Soist surveyed the room and said, "Nothing was taken or left behind. It was like no one stepped inside. His Grace suspects that he died or was vaporized from contact with some sealed artifact. Our priority is to find his partner. No, Dwayne Dantès wouldn't die that easily. He's a monster who has lived since the fourth epoch. However, why did he carry out the infiltration?" Leonard frowned slightly as he hesitated for a moment. Then, he proactively included Dwayne Dantès into the investigation targets for himself and 2 other teammates. After the Red Gloves and local Nighthawks began taking action, Leonard found an excuse to head to the washroom first. He suppressed his voice and asked, "What are your thoughts about Dwayne Dantès? He didn't expose his parasite's lie." The elderly voice chuckled and said, "Didn't I tell you? I don't know much about him. I only know that there's something special about him. His aura has something ancient about it. However, the case you previously investigated gave me some inspiration. I suspect that Dwayne Dantès might be related to that matter. He might be a proxy of some existence." "What matter? Which existence?" Leonard muttered softly in surprise. In his mind, the ancient voice replied with an odd tone, "The fool that doesn't belong to this era." 160 Buckland Street. Klein had his breakfast and returned to the balcony's half-open room. He sat in his reclining chair and raised his hand to rub his temples. After his tense mood subsided, Klein discovered that his mind had turned somewhat adrift. He would often see the hanging corpses in the ancient cathedral, as well as the cluster of translucent maggots that remained unclear in his deepest memories. Illusory voices would seem to constantly echo in his ears: Hornacis. Phlegria. Although I had quickly cut the connection with my marionette, I had suffered some of the effects. My soul has been slightly corrupted. As expected of a real mythical creature. After the preliminary investigations are done, I'll have to find a way to resolve the remnant problems. Klein slowly heaved a sigh of relief and used cogitation to calm himself. 847 The name hidden in the Dossiers plus, turn off reset. A carriage passed by Buckland Street as Leonard Mitchell and two Red Gloves teammates discussed the target they were investigating this time, Dwayne Dantès. I still haven't had any direct contact with this gentleman. I've only investigated his servants and neighbors. Cindy, who had long wine-red hair, introduced her findings. For now, it has been confirmed that Dwayne Dantès has acted the same since last night to this morning. He went to his bedroom to sleep at 11 and finished washing up at 7:30 in the morning. At times, he would have some supper and end the day after midnight. At times, he would wake up before 7 and head out for a stroll, but that's not the norm. Another Red Glove, Bob, nodded and said, from this point of view, there's nothing wrong with Dwayne Dantès. Leonard Mitchell, who sat in a seemingly casual manner, immediately said with a smile, but the reverse can also be true. According to what we've currently gathered, the missing servant was likely replaced between 11:20 and 11:35 last night. The infiltrator entered Cheney's gate at 6 in the morning, and we discovered the problem at 7:20 a.m. without finding the target. It can thus be said that during the infiltration, Dwayne Dantès was sleeping and lacked an alibi. What you say makes sense. Cindy glanced at Leonard in surprise. Her impression of this teammate of hers was one who often had a judgment or question that pointed at the core of the problem. However, he seldom described his logic in great detail. He was more like a desultory poet who occasionally had epiphanies. Bob, who had a sharp chin, frowned as he shook his head. If that's the case, everyone on this name list cannot be cleared of suspicion. They were sleeping with no one watching them. Even if they have wives or husbands, they would similarly be sleeping at such times. Also, I don't believe an infiltrator would be so bold. He had already entered Cheney's gate and managed to successfully escape, completing an unimaginable feat, yet, he stays nearby and hasn't abandoned his identity or gone far away. How is this possible? The risk involved cannot be predicted unless he's also planning something else. Or he can't bear to part with certain things, but what can compare with infiltrating Cheney's gate? What can compare with those sealed artifacts, ingredients, and formulas? If I didn't know that Dwayne Dantès was problematic in the first place, I would have come to the same conclusion. Leonard had already thought of an explanation as he crossed his right leg. I'm just saying why we can't so easily strike off Dwayne Dantès from the suspects. Besides, Captain Soist has said it. The infiltrator might have already died behind Cheney's gate. Even if Dwayne Dantès isn't involved, he might very well be an accomplice. Don't you find it too much of a coincidence? He moved in for less than 2 months, and the church encountered something that might never happen in centuries. Besides, he has been visiting St. Samuel Cathedral too frequently. He had ample opportunities to figure out the corresponding situation. Also, during this period of time, there was a strange sewer explosion along Buckland Street. Cindy bunched up her long, wine-red hair and said, "You've convinced me. This should be a target that we put our focus on." Bob pulled at the ends of his left palm's red glove and said, "There are indeed many coincidences. However, coincidences might not be equivalent to problems. Even if Dwayne Dantès goes to the cathedral daily and listens to the bishop's preachings, all he could do is understand the layout and not obtain deeper information, such as when the keepers will head to Cheney's gate and how the handover is done with the Nighthawks. Therefore, he's more likely to be one of the accomplices," Leonard said with a shrug. He similarly didn't understand how Dwayne Dantès would understand the internal protocols of the Nighthawks so well. Cindy echoed, regardless, we have to do a deeper investigation. Shall we wait till noon and directly enter Dwayne Dantès' dream to question him? He has the habit of taking afternoon naps. Leonard raised his right hand and waved it gently. There's no need to be in such a hurry. It's not like we've never done any routine inspections in the past or entered his dreams, but we didn't discover anything wrong. If there really is nothing wrong with him, we wouldn't gain anything from entering his dream again. If there's a problem with him, the fact that he didn't expose himself back then means he has the means to resist an inquiry during the dream. We will still be fooled by him if we enter his dream again. Therefore, we should monitor him and see what kind of people he interacts with, so as to prevent him from escaping while waiting for Desi's response about this tycoon's true identity. Once we discover any clues, we will request to use a higher-level investigation method than questioning him in dreams. Cindy was once again surprised as she couldn't help but joke, it's rare to see you analyze the situation so seriously. Furthermore, his thought processes were extremely clear. Leonard fell silent and gave a self-deprecating comment. Perhaps it's because I've encountered something similar. Instantly, Cindy felt that Leonard's green eyes had turned darker. She didn't speak further. Let's take turns to monitor Dwayne Dantès. I'll go first. All right. Leonard nodded and turned to Bob. Get the case files on the sewer explosion. Let's see if we can discover any problems. I'll head back to read through the corresponding dossiers and see if there are any other abnormalities on this street. After splitting the work, the three red gloves began their work. Leonard returned to St. Samuel Cathedral's basement and obtained the information involving Buckland Street and the cases that the Aurora Order had actively or passively involved themselves in for the past 3 years. The latter was something that sparked off the clue provided by the parasite in him. It gave him an idea. Since the Fool's existence and the corresponding honorific name initially came from the Aurora Order, it means that the Aurora Order was involved in something or had suffered some setbacks. It might be related to the organization that believes in the Fool. After returning to the office, Leonard held back his desultory attitude as he very seriously read through the thick dossiers. In the dossiers related to the Aurora Order, there was the Lenivis case he was most familiar with. This true creator's descent had failed terribly because of some baffling report. A mysterious person had appeared to kill the main criminal. He was suspected to be related to hero bandit Black Emperor. As he targeted evil criminals, he would scatter tarot cards over the target's corpse. That person wasn't able to do it for Desire Apostle Jason Beria only because Leonard had rushed over too quickly. Similarly, Leonard once again saw the name, Sherlock Moriarty, appear in the periphery of the case. Aurora Order's Mr. X was assassinated at the gathering he convened. There were traces of powers at the demigod level left at the scene. At this point in time, Dwayne Dantès had already arrived in Backland. It matches perfectly. Aurora Order's Mr. A and the Demonist sect cooperated to create the Great Smog of Backland. This person vanished as a result. Aurora Order's Mr. A had assassinated the Intis ambassador. Leonard read case after case, but he didn't find anything of use. He rubbed his temples and decided to attack it from a different angle. He began from the cases related to hero bandit Black Emperor. Lenivis case. First murder scene with the tarot cards thrown as a ritual. And the Fool is the beginning of the tarot cards. Capim's case. From the strength and level showcased by hero bandit Black Emperor, he won't. And wouldn't mimic others. He similarly scattered tarot cards on the corpse. Desire Apostle Jason Beria. I saw hero bandit Black Emperor with my own eyes, preventing him from scattering the cards in time. Apart from major events and evil criminals, what other connection do these three cases have? Leonard had previously considered the relevant questions and was certain that Detective Sherlock Moriarty had been partially involved in the Lenivis and Capim cases. Then what about the Desire Apostle case? Leonard found the addendum and began leafing through them. Finally, he spotted a line in an inconspicuous spot. People attacked involved Isengard Stanton, Sherlock Moriarty. Leonard's expression slowly turned excited as though he had discovered a breakthrough. He flipped through the Aurora Order dossier and didn't miss out any of the names involved. He kept expanding his search and requested for all the dossiers that involved every name. Aurora Order's mystery assassinated the Intis ambassador. The Intis ambassador was in charge of the conflict over the Difference Engine manuscripts. The clues to the manuscripts came from a spy who usually acted as a private detective. It is reported that another private detective was embroiled in this matter and had nearly been killed by a gang member under the command of the Intis ambassador. Another private detective. Leonard suddenly stood up as he left St. Samuel Cathedral and headed for the police station that handled the case back then. Although most of the dossiers had been taken away by MI9, Leonard still found the name of the person who had made the police report, Sherlock Moriarty. I now have reason to believe that this great detective was also involved in the Great Smog of Backland. Among the various people who are involved, his name appears, right at the periphery of the matter. He and Dwayne Dantès all belong to a secret organization that believes in the fool? Leonard thought as the corners of his lips curled up. He decided to immediately search for more information to verify his conjecture. 160 Buckland Street, inside the master bedroom. Klein didn't have any nighthawks enter his dream during his afternoon nap, but he once again returned to the foggy town. He saw Demoness of Despair Panatia with her smile showcasing blood-colored flesh in between the gaps of her teeth. He saw her slowly being hung up as her eyes rolled back in despair before her head drooped down. The hung corpses, the horrifying gigantic mushroom, the cluster of countless translucent maggots kept appearing one after another, waking Klein up from his dream. As he rubbed his temples, Klein found that his mind was in a terrible condition. And this wasn't a problem that could be resolved by the gray fog. He fell into deep thought and entered his bathroom and arrived above the gray fog. He conjured Gehrman and made him pray. Please pass on my question to Miss Justice about when she will be free. I wish to receive some psychotherapy. 848 Getting caught in the crossfire plus, turn off reset. Backland, Empress Borough, inside the Hall family's luxurious mansion. Audrey had just tried on 3 selections of evening gowns today, and she was sitting on a cushioned chair, wondering how they could be matched with her accessories and which one she was more inclined towards. She also pondered over her mother's opinion. At this moment, she suddenly saw an endless grayish-white and a blurry figure watching down at everything from high above appear before her eyes. Immediately after that, she saw another figure. It was a praying figure that had been shrouded by the gray fog. Her ears resounded with the corresponding words. Instead of being alarmed, Audrey was delighted. Her unease and worry that there wasn't a tarot gathering today was instantly quelled. As expected, it was nothing. Oh, Mr. World really has a psychological problem. He must have been under immense stress recently. It's no wonder he booked an appointment in advance. Audrey sighed as she began to consider when she was free. As she pondered, she scanned the maids who were busy in her room and the golden retriever, Susie, who was sitting by the door. Audrey's lips curled up slightly in an irresistible manner as she bowed her head and secretly prayed in response. Please tell Mr. World that I'm currently free. He can determine the time and location. As long as it's not night time and doesn't exceed the boroughs west of Backland. In regards to this, the golden retriever who was observing the maid's work seemed to sense someone looking at her. She suspiciously turned her head and looked in Audrey's direction. However, it failed to discover any problems. Above the gray fog, inside the palace that looked like a giant's residence. She's free at any time. Periods when it's convenient to head out. Won't leave places she's familiar with. Klein rubbed his temples as he interpreted Miss Justice's reply. His first reaction was that it was best done today or tomorrow, and to have her determine the location. Then, he could use creeping hunger to teleport there, but he soon thought of a problem. Dwayne Dantès was part of the Nighthawk's investigations. It was very possible that he was being monitored, therefore, rashly traveling could easily expose him. Wait a few days, or... Klein seriously thought about it as he conjured the World Gehrman Sparrow and prayed once again. Please inform Miss Justice that let's do it today. Above the gray fog. Ah? Audrey's eyes widened. She found that the answer provided by Mr. World exceeded her expectations. How was she supposed to get Susie to be her stand-in? Besides, there are many details that I'm unable to see or clearly sense while inside Mr. Fool's palace. It will seriously hamper any psychotherapy. Audrey calmed her sense of alarm as she posed her doubts from a position of viability and requested Mr. Fool to pass it on to Mr. World. Before long, she received a reply again. I will request Mr. Fool to remove those restrictions. We'll use other means to conceal our true appearances. That can be done? This is the special treatment one gets from being Mr. Fool's blessed? Our continuous communication is almost like a conversation. I've really troubled Mr. Fool. And he seems to almost allow us to indulge in it. Audrey's thoughts raced as she stopped finding excuses. All right. Let's do it between 11:30 to 12:30 tonight. She didn't believe that she would have anywhere to be alone before the end of her birthday ball. At the same time, in a building at 39 Buckland Street. Hazel was looking at the selected evening gown in boredom as she listened to her mother's repeated exhortations. She was to accompany her parents to attend Miss Audrey Hall's birthday ball. Just as Hazel's thoughts were wandering and her mind gradually turning blank, she saw a grayish-white rat appear by the door. It was frantically waving its paws. This? Hazel patiently listened to her mother repeat herself one more time before finding an excuse to return to her bedroom. After she closed and locked her door, the grayish-white rat appeared from somewhere and arrived by her feet. It sat there in a rather comical manner. I've discovered something wrong with the surroundings. The rat had sent vibrations in the air to speak with human words. Hazel wasn't surprised at that as she asked in puzzlement, "What's wrong?" The grayish-white rat raised its right forepaw and pointed out the window. There are beyonders from the Church of Evernight investigating this street. It's at a rather large scale. What are they looking for? Hazel asked with a slight frown. The grayish-white rat slowly inhaled and said, "How would I know? But it's definitely something very serious. This way, they might very well discover something wrong with you." Hazel asked, feeling somewhat worried and confused, how did they make the discovery? Weren't the clues in the sewers blasted away? Weren't the corresponding problems dealt with? The grayish-white was momentarily unsure about what to say. A few seconds later, it vaguely replied, "Official Beyonders have plenty of strange but effective investigation methods. In short, I'll have to deal with your dream. This is where it's easiest to divulge things." Hazel looked down at the rat as her knitted brows relaxed. "All right then. Don't look so unwilling. It wasn't easy for me to accumulate this bit of strength, and now it's going to waste once again. Is this street cursed? First it was that demoness with a strange condition. Following that hero bandit Black Emperor appeared. Now, there's some baffling and unknown situation that made the Nighthawks pay serious attention to this street." The grayish-white rat squeaked in frustration. At 7:30 in the evening, Hazel accompanied her parents, Member of Parliament Mocht and Lady Rihanna, to Empress Borough and entered the Hall family's residence. As it was a birthday ball today, she didn't manage to directly meet Miss Audrey Hall. All she did was quietly stay by her parents' side as they exchanged pleasantries with Earl Hall, Lady Caitlin, and Lord Hibbert Hall. To her, these respected aristocrats were, in essence, the same as commoners. Therefore, she didn't appear notably reserved. Her actions and tone were rather liberal. If it wasn't because of her mother's repeated exhortations, Hazel even believed that the beautiful dance floor, the murals with high artistic value, and the elegant and outstanding statues were more worthy of respect. As she smiled at the people she knew and didn't know, Hazel finally waited until the ball began. She saw the star of tonight's show. Miss Audrey Hall held the arms of the Earl and Earl's wife as she walked out of the room on the second floor before arriving at the railings that faced the dance floor. Hazel scanned her and habitually ignored her appearance as she observed the matching of her gown and accessories. However, her gaze wasn't able to move away. On the chandelier hanging high above, whale oil candles produced light that came with dreamy colors. When shining on the 18-year-old Audrey, it made her emerald-like eyes, pure and indescribable face, and lustrous gold hair seem to glow. It made her gown and accessories lose their luster. Hazel was momentarily caught in a daze. She failed to hear what Earl Hall had said until the melody filled the floor as she snapped out of her daze when Audrey Hall began the opening dance with the Earl. The always proud her had suddenly felt a little inferior. She felt that even if this striking lady didn't possess any beyond her powers, there was no way Audrey was inferior to her. Hazel pursed her lips and looked around. She realized that everyone's gaze had been grabbed. The only difference was that they all had different feelings about the situation. Phew. Hazel heaved a sigh of relief. That night, she didn't act that arrogantly again. However, she yearned to leave at every minute of the night. She wanted to head home to busy herself with her matters to obtain more magical and powerful abilities. Finally, the ball came to an end as Hazel's family bade farewell to the family and walked to the door. On the way out, Hazel couldn't help but look back. She saw Miss Audrey standing along the sides of the dance floor with a faint and beautiful smile as she expressed her gratitude to each and every guest that was about to leave. She seemed to remain under the spotlight. After the end of the birthday ball, Audrey took off her accessories and changed into her sleeping gown before entering her bathroom. As she looked at the white steam emanate with her bathrobe beside her, Audrey wasn't in a rush to soak herself inside. She first sat in the corner and prayed to Mr. Fool to indicate that she was ready. In about 10 seconds, she saw crimson light surge at her like a tidal wave, drowning her. Above the gray fog, Audrey appeared by the side of the long bronze table. This time, she didn't see Mr. Fool who was enshrouded in gray fog. She discovered an ancient confessional. It was a brown crate that was 1.5 times the height of a person. There were doors on both sides, and a wooden plank separated the area in between them. I thought Mr. World would request Mr. Fool to conjure a wall which we will use to communicate across. Although it's essentially the same, a confessional is cramped and dark. He really doesn't know how to consider a lady's feelings. Yes, I would find it odd if Mr. World did that. As Audrey suffused a smile, she walked to the ajar door of the confessional. She bent her back and entered before sitting down with her legs bent sideways. After closing the wooden door, Audrey, who was treating a patient in the true sense of the word for the first time, suddenly felt a little excited. Immersed in darkness, the environment and her mood made her loosen up from the many rules she had to abide by. She curled her lips and reached out her fingers and gently tapped on the wooden partition. "Hello, Mr. World, are you there?" Sitting cross-legged opposite her, Klein was infected by Miss Justice's cheerful tone. His emotions relaxed as he said, "You may begin." This time, he didn't use the gray fog to enshroud himself but had turned himself into Gehrman Sparrow. Indeed, Mr. World's mental state isn't too good. He's too tense and worried. Audrey sensed him first and then used a psychiatrist's placate. A gentle, invisible wave emanated over as Klein instantly felt a cool, refreshing morning breeze blow at him during a hot summer day. The frustrations and feverish feelings within him suddenly vanished. Seeing Mr. World having made an obvious recovery, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief and asked softly, "Have you had any nightmares lately?" "Nightmare?" Klein deliberated for 2 seconds and said, "Yes. I dream of a town that's enshrouded in fog. The crimson moon in the sky would be clear and blurred at random. In the middle of the town is a black cathedral. Corpses are hung up inside. They wear clothes from different eras as they sway in the wind and produce strange sounds. Apart from that, there's a beautiful lady whose gaps in her teeth were filled with blood-colored human flesh, a mushroom man formed of countless tiny mushrooms." To treat his psychological problems, Klein reconstructed his dream in a rather complete manner. However, he didn't say that he had encountered those things in reality, nor divulge that he knew the beautiful lady's identity and the strange mushroom's origins. At the same time, he hid the existence of the cluster of translucent maggots and Zeridol. Audrey listened intently and seriously. Based on her beyond her intuition and knowledge from mysticism and psychological, she said as she contemplated, "Mr. World, I can imagine such a terrifying and sinister dream. I can also experience the immense horror that it brings you." Seeing that there wasn't any rebuttal from the other side of the wooden partition, Audrey grew in confidence. She silently did another round of placate and began guiding. The horror that appears in dreams will often stem from feelings hidden deep in one's heart. And there are only two sources of horror in one's heart. One is the unknown, and the second is what cannot be resisted. The terrifying things you see in your dream are only superficial. What you are really afraid of is what they represent and symbolize, the truth hidden behind them. As she spoke, Audrey suddenly asked, "What is it?" Klein was gradually relaxing and scrutinizing himself as he took in Miss Justice's gentle and sweet voice. When he suddenly heard this question, he subconsciously answered, "The existence that created all of that." He paused and hesitantly added, "They are both an unknown and also cannot be resisted." At this point, Klein knew why he was having nightmares, as well as the true reason for his terrible mental state. He instinctively felt horrified over certain matters and instinctively had latent negative emotions. The former included the cluster of translucent maggots and Zeradol's terrifying performance. There was also the Eraser Angel's baffling actions and the fact that using the dark sacred emblem was the key to opening the door. They separately created a mood of despair that seemed impossible to resist, as well as the feeling of not knowing who was friend or foe, and their ploys. Yes, I'm fearful that the cluster of translucent maggots that's suspected to be a sequence one attendant of mysteries of the seer pathway. I'm fearful of Zeradol who has accomplished an unknown objective by opening the door. I'm fearful of the goddess whose thoughts are an unknown, as well as the Eraser Angel. Klein slowly exhaled as he admitted his fears. Audrey used placate once again and discovered that Mr. World's tense mind had essentially relaxed. She was delighted as she boldly said, "One of the biggest sources of fear is a lack of confidence. Try recalling if you had any oversight or had committed any mistakes in the related matter. This results in your spirit repeatedly warning you and hinting to you." It eventually transformed into part of the nightmare. Oversight and mistakes. Warning from my spirit. Klein pondered over Miss Justice's words and seriously began organizing the details of the matters that resulted in his horror. Soon, his expression turned heavy, bit by bit, as he discovered a problem. "I swore an oath with the goddess bearing witness via the holy sword. Although I hadn't become a clown, with the Grey Fog's powers yet to have entered the real world, preventing me from being noticed by special deities, demigods, and spirit world creatures. However, I couldn't fool fate, which would also be beyonders of the monster pathway. And the goddess has another title. She is the Empress of Misfortune and Horror. She wields control over misfortune and is one of the deities in the domain of fate. Therefore, I was noticed from back then?" Klein's heart sank bit by bit as the horror that stemmed from the unknown was greatly alleviated. He didn't reply nor did he wait for Miss Justice to speak again. He switched to asking, "If you will face one or even many difficult-to-challenge enemies, what would you do?" Audrey wasn't annoyed by her patient's question. Instead, she felt that it was a good sign. After some deliberation, she said, "First avoid them and hide. Try harder to improve yourself. What if the time won from avoiding and hiding isn't enough to make you grow to a level that is sufficient enough to face your enemies?" Klein pressed, "What if the gap between the two is difficult to bridge?" Audrey answered him seriously while also consoling him, "Find enough helpers." Helpers? Names suddenly flashed across Klein's mind as his heart felt a lot more settled. He then continued asking, "What if the enemies cannot be resisted even with helpers? What if there are helpers who are plotting something that might be beneficial to you, but they might also bring you harm?" Audrey drew a blank, and after a few seconds of thought, she replied, "You can pray to a deity." She nearly said to the world, "You can seek Mr. Fool's help." And from the question and answer session, Audrey was able to confirm a matter. The mental problems that Mr. World was suffering stemmed from powerful and terrifying enemies, but there was a worry that, at a deeper level, the helpers had unknown stances. Pray to a deity. Klein didn't dare to directly say, what if deities couldn't resolve it because the thoughts of deities are even harder to fathom? After all, this was the Fool's kingdom, and he was a blessed. He organized his words and said, "Deities can only provide help in certain areas." And what if that isn't enough? Audrey originally wanted to say that there was always a way and that good was bound to defeat evil, but she couldn't convince herself of it. She couldn't provide any relevant case studies, so eventually, she pursed her lips and said, "I don't know." In the confessional, it was a still darkness. The two temporarily stopped speaking as they fell into their respective inner struggles. Finally, Audrey broke the silence and looked at the wooden partition. "Regardless, something needs to be done. Work hard at it. You can't just give up like that and not put up a fight." "That's right. At the very least, I still have many secrets and things to rely on." Klein closed his eyes as he leaned on the wooden plank. His thoughts slowly rewound from the most recent events as he was no longer constantly tense and often frustrated. Audrey sensed his change and immediately added a placate. With that, Klein's mental condition was completely restored back to normal. "I feel much better. Thank you for your treatment. What kind of consultation fee do you want?" Klein offered. "Actually, I should be the one thanking you for providing me an opportunity to handle a case." Audrey didn't really wish to collect any fees as she looked at the wooden partition in the darkness. She couldn't help but recall Mr. World's usual gloominess and coldness, as well as his experienced and ruthless demeanor. His mental problems likely also have to do with his personality. Audrey suddenly had an idea as she smiled. "The consultation fee that I charge isn't much at all." "Yeah, wish me happiness." "What's going on?" Klein was momentarily stunned. He nearly forgot he was wearing the facade of Gehrman Sparrow. This was a request he had never heard of before. Klein hesitated for a moment. Finally, he pretended to coldly say with the world's identity, since she requested, "I wish you happiness." Audrey's smile turned into a beaming smile. "I wish you happiness too. Mr. World, don't always keep everything inside. Smile more and be happier. It can eliminate most of the latent problems." "Alright, your mental problems have been resolved, but you will need a follow-up appointment in a few days or by next week." Klein was at a loss for an answer as he tersely acknowledged an affirmation. Then, he heard the door on the other side creak open. With the fool's angle, he saw Miss Justice retreat from the confessional and straighten her body. After sending her to the real world, Klein didn't dare stay above the gray fog for too long. He quickly left and got into bed. At that moment, his mental condition had been restored. With his body and mind at ease, he realized something. He had digested quite a bit of his marionettist potion. The progress had surpassed his expectations. "This is because I relied on my marionette to fool a demigod, Panatia, and orchestrated her and Mr. A to complete my planned-out performance at the foggy town? Therefore, apart from trying to hide behind the shadows and let every marionette have their own persona to make it more realistic, the marionettist principles include use one's marionette as a guide to control the enemy to play the role of a puppet." Klein thought as he muttered inwardly in thought. He believed that he could digest the potion before the end of the year. He exhaled with mixed feelings as he turned his head and looked at the crimson moonlight that penetrated the curtains as he silently said, "That missing servant should have been found. The clues I left behind should have been discovered as well." In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard, Cindy, Bob, and company looked at Captain Soest who had returned from a meeting as they patiently waited for him to introduce new clues. Soest drank a mouthful of aromatic coffee and said, "The missing servant has been found. And in the room he was left in, there were some clothes left behind by the infiltrator. It has been confirmed that it belongs to the crazy adventurer, Gehrman Sparrow, who had previously been active at sea." "Why did it involve another crazy adventurer?" Leonard was somewhat puzzled as he directly asked, "When did he come to Backland?" "No one knows. The only thing that can be confirmed is that this crazy adventurer had appeared at sea in the recent few weeks and had hunted a few pirates," Soest said in an unhurried tone. "The Church of Storms knows more. MI9 also seems to know quite a bit. The higher-ups will send people to liaise with them." Just as Soest finished his briefing, a telegram was sent over. It came from the Nighthawks in Desi. The content, which was decoded, read, "Dwayne Dantès' present identity is fake. In the past 10 years he spent in the southern continent, he had relied on adventuring to amass a significant amount of wealth. Further confirmation will require some time. As this place is very chaotic and there are often wars, the jurisdiction of zones are frequently changed. 850 The devil is in the details plus, turn off reset. Sounds like a contrived story. Ever since the new sea route was discovered, there has been no end to stories of people becoming rich from taking risks, Soest casually commented on the content of the telegram. As he thought, he looked towards a particular red glove. I recall that we had investigated Dwayne Dantès before and had an exchange with him in his dream. Yes, the red glove who was responsible for the task nodded and replied. I didn't directly ask him about such matters, but I could tell that Dwayne Dantès was very familiar with the southern continent. He had plenty of experience there. Haha, that might be information that Dwayne Dantès deliberately revealed to you. Leonard had his doubts regarding the contents of the telegram, believing that this was another layer of disguise from an undying monster who had lived since the fourth epoch. However, he didn't inform his teammates about his conjectures, because he had no basis for them. Soest didn't pay great attention to the matter as he said, do you have any problems with the clues related to Gehrman Sparrow? Since this crazy adventurer was still at sea in recent weeks, when did he come to Backland? As a nightmare, Cindy repeated her doubts, what I'm concerned about isn't the exact time, but whether he has the time to travel to Backland. After all, we're rather far from the sea. Soest nodded gently and said, in the meeting, a deacon raised this question. According to the time and venue of Gehrman Sparrow's last sighting, he normally has no way to arrive in Backland last night and complete an infiltration. Of course, I'm referring to normal circumstances. The missing servant told us that when he was sweeping the square, he suddenly lost control of his body. He froze on the spot and was unable to cry for help. Then, he saw bright colors like an abstract oil painting, and he felt that his body was floating upwards. Later, he lost consciousness, and after awakening, he found himself in a room in East Borough. The former matches with the keeper's description of being possessed by a wraith. The latter is suspected to be a traveler's teleport. If it really is teleport, then Gehrman Sparrow can appear in Backland at any moment. As elites of the Nighthawks, the Red Gloves knew about the various Beyonder pathways far better than their colleagues which were at the same level. They were no strangers to wraiths and travelers. After listening to the captain's explanation, another Red Glove added and thought, it's rumored that Admiral of Blood, who was hunted by Gehrman Sparrow, is a wraith. The details matched. And as for Gehrman Sparrow being able to obtain the powers to become a wraith, it wasn't unacceptable. The easiest method was to find an artisan to make one's prey into a mystical item. Cindy recalled even more information with this stimulus. It said that Gehrman Sparrow has the ability to change his appearance. And the infiltrator had disguised himself as the keeper. Another detail matched. Excellent thinking, Soest raised his hand to rub his temples. According to these details, we can come to a preliminary consensus that the infiltrator is Gehrman Sparrow. And this way, the name list we came up with might be erroneous. Gehrman Sparrow doesn't need a companion to frequently come to the cathedral to pray to gather information. He can change his appearance every day and enter to figure out the situation. This will be more indiscreet than using a companion. As the largest and most holy church of Evernight Cathedral in Backland, the number of believers that came to St. Samuel Cathedral on a daily basis was too numerous to count. No bishop could remember every unfamiliar face that they once met. That also means that the names we have here are meaningless? Leonard raised his hand to rub his brows, sounding rather desultory. That's somewhat obvious. Our focus now should be on Gehrman Sparrow. The other targets can be placed aside as we perform the most basic level of surveillance. Having said that, Soest clapped and said, all right, get busy. Leonard didn't have any objections. He happened to hope to find the machinery hivemind, mandated punishers, and MI9 to gather some information. On Tuesday morning, Klein woke up naturally, feeling relaxed and calm. He had the feeling of joyful emotions slowly coming to life. A psychiatrist's Beyonder powers are quite useful after all. It really matches the extremely infectious optimism that Miss Justice brings with her. Klein got out of bed and drew the curtains. He leisurely took in the scenery outside and the scattering golden sunlight. He regained his drive and began formulating his plans for the next couple months and even the year. First, get a new marionette. Second, use the identity of Dwayne Dantès and the control over a marionette to orchestrate scripts to expedite the digestion of the potion. Third, during this process, slowly gather the ingredients needed for the Bizarro Sorcerer potion. In that regard, I can ask Little Son about the Bizarro Bane to see if he has any clues. I'll seek Mr. Azek's help regarding the Spirit World Plunderer. After all, the Underworld is part of the Spirit World. Fourth, I'll continue investigating the Great Smog of Backland and find the true culprit. This includes Ensanguil, as well as the demigod that killed Crazy Captain. There aren't any targets more suitable than them for my advancement ritual. However, I have to be careful of 0-08. I have to constantly keep watch of any intentional coincidences. I'll just dabble in the matter in an ordinary manner and mainly provide support. The dangerous investigations can be handed to Demonestrisi. Klein's thought processes slowly became clear. Although he still felt worried and fearful, this no longer affected his mental state and capacity to take action. Retracting his gaze from outside the balcony, Klein walked into the bathroom and washed up. Soon, he opened the door while feeling highly spirited, and he saw his valet, Richardson, and butler, Walter, waiting outside. The gentleman was wearing white gloves as he politely bowed and said, "Good morning, sir. There's only one item on your schedule today. It's to join an event at the East Balham Military Veterans Mess with Member of Parliament Mocked at 3 in the afternoon. He's a new Member of Parliament, so by accepting his invitation, it will also indicate your political inclinations. You still have the opportunity to be hesitant about it." Klein thought for a moment before saying, "There's no need. It's my choice." He paused and asked in an inquiring tone, "It will be my first time visiting the East Balham Military Veterans Mess. What should I take note of?" "Praise their work that they have established in East Balham. Use this opportunity to make some donations. There's no need to give too much or little. £500 is a rather suitable sum," Walter provided his opinion. £500. Seriously, no matter which circle I enter, I'll have to spend large sums of money. Sigh, this is because Dwayne Dantès doesn't have any birthright or background. He can only open a path with cash. Klein nodded gently and agreed with his butler's suggestion. At the same time, he quickly did a count of his present assets. The artisan hasn't completed the work regarding the ocean songster, but the money for Mentor of Confusion and Druid has been obtained. That's a total of £16,000. With the cash I originally had on hand, subtracting the £13,000 I used to purchase 3% of the Coin Company's shares, as well as the daily expenses of a tycoon's household and the donations at the cathedral, there's still £23,985 and 5 gold coins left. In addition, I still owe Miss Messenger 3,413 gold coins. £500 has already exceeded 2% of the cash I have on hand. Klein didn't speak further as he walked out of his bedroom, going to the second floor where the dining room was in order to have his breakfast. In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard Mitchell returned to his office earlier than his teammates. He had already obtained the relevant information and had learned of an inconspicuous matter. Prince Edisac, who passed away in the Great Smog of Backland, had once hired a private detective to investigate the death of equestrian teacher, Talum Dumont. And that private detective's name was Sherlock Moriarty. As expected, there are hints of him being involved with the Great Smog of Backland. Leonard was delighted as he excitedly ruffled his hair. Following that, he pounded down at the documents on his desk with his fist, planning to seek out even more clues. However, he suddenly fell silent for about 8 seconds before raising his cup in embarrassment and drank a mouthful of coffee. He mumbled inwardly, "What did I want to do? I forgot about it after the pounding." After some careful recall, Leonard finally recalled what it was. He pulled out his drawer and took out a deck of tarot cards. Then, he found the Fool card and placed it on a piece of paper. On it, he wrote 3 names. Sherlock Moriarty, Gehrman Sparrow, Dwayne Dantès. After some hesitation, Leonard drew a line linking the three names to the Fool card, indicating that they might very well be members of a secret organization that believed in the Fool. Among them, he was most unsure of Gehrman Sparrow's identity as he wrote a question mark. Later, Leonard took out the Emperor card and stuck it beside the name, Sherlock Moriarty. He labeled it Suspected to be. Gehrman Sparrow and Dwayne Dantès each correspond to a card? Leonard muttered silently. He took out the Crazy Adventurer's records and began reading them seriously. Suddenly, he found a date very familiar. Early January. Gehrman Sparrow's first appearance was in early January. No way. Leonard drew a gasp as he flipped through another set of documents. At the end of it were the words. At the end of December, Sherlock Moriarty left Backland and headed south for a vacation. He has yet to return. End of December. Early January. Backland. Pritz Harbor. Gehrman Sparrow can change his appearance. No way? Leonard mumbled inwardly as he drew a dotted equality sign between Sherlock Moriarty and Gehrman Sparrow. This great detective is the key. Leonard found Sherlock Moriarty's portrait that he had drawn via a ritual as he carefully looked at it. After considering the point that looks could be changed, he began imagining the detective in different disguises. As he did it, Leonard's gaze froze bit by bit as he couldn't help but frown. Leonard stared intently at the portrait of Sherlock Moriarty. His brain had just imagined what the latter would look like without glasses or a beard. Although this could be quite different from the actual situation and was more of a product of imagination, Leonard increasingly found Sherlock Moriarty very familiar, as though he had known him before. How is that possible? He's long dead. And I buried him with my own hands. Leonard couldn't help but shake his head as he muttered with a scoff. Just as he said that, his expression froze because the person in his memories held a huge secret. This person had strangely escaped the influence of 2-049 without the help of others. This person used 2-049's uniqueness to finish off a sequence 7 Beyonder, and back then, he was only a seer who isn't good at combat. This person had managed to summarize the acting method within a very short amount of time, and he had advanced to sequence 8 at an extraordinary pace. This person possessed a high-sequence sun domain charm and had used it with Captain Dunn Smith, who wielded a saint's ashes, successfully finishing off Megos, who was pregnant with an evil god's spawn. This person's sequence 8 Beyonder characteristic had been taken away by Ensanguil, but Captain Dunn Smith's sequence 7 Beyonder characteristic was left behind. Perhaps, it wasn't because Ensanguil had taken away the Beyonder characteristic which had appeared, causing it to be missing from the scene, but that it had never formed to begin with. Leonard Moriarty suddenly jolted to his senses as he observed Sherlock Moriarty's portrait again. 10 seconds later, he squeezed the words through his clenched teeth, Klein Moretti. He found that the mysterious detective, Sherlock Moriarty, looked more and more like his former teammate, the hero who saved Tingen, Klein Moretti. And this was under the scenario of him being without the clear discrepancies of glasses and a beard. Leonard's had fingers clenched tightly at some point in time as his joints suffused with a whiteness. After a moment, he let out a clear pant as he picked up Sherlock Moriarty's dossier again. This time, he flipped with a target in mind, roughly to the time when Sherlock first appeared in Backland, early September. And this wasn't long after Klein Moretti had been buried. Leonard Mitchell's green eyes turned dark as he instinctively flipped through the dossier. Then, he saw a name, Lenevis. This was one of the masterminds behind the evil god's descent in Tingen City. He was one of the main murderers who led to the death of Dunn Smith and Klein Moretti, and the other Nighthawks. And Sherlock Moriarty's second record in Backland was his investigations at the dock for a serial murder, thus, bumping into the disguised Lenevis. After this, the true creator's plan of descending was foiled, and Lenevis died in the sewers. His body was scattered with tarot cards, making it identical in style to the subsequent hero bandit Black Emperor. He didn't forget the harm that swindler brought. Leonard whispered silently, his expression softening. He quickly flipped through the documents and sat in his chair, motionless for an extended period of time. It was as though he had fallen asleep from the shadows brought about by the light. After a few minutes, Leonard finally moved. He leaned into the chair and said in a deep voice, "Old man, do you think this detective, Sherlock Moriarty, resembles my teammate back in Tingen City, Klein Moretti?" In his mind, the aged voice said after some hesitation, "The one who joined the Nighthawks because of the Antigonus family's notebook?" "Yes," Leonard answered in a heavy voice. In his body, the parasite said after 2 seconds, "There's some resemblance." After receiving the reply, Leonard once again fell silent. After a long while, he took out a gold pocket watch and snapped it open to determine that it was still morning. Leonard snapped the pocket watch closed and stood up, nearly overturning the stack of documents. He hurriedly reached out his hand and held on to the documents. Then, he left behind a note, saying that he had found certain clues and planned to head out to do some investigations, thus, making it possible that he would return very late. Let me see if someone is pretending to be Tingen City's hero, or if you've always been wearing masks, a secret organization member who sneaked into the Nighthawks. Your true motives aren't much loftier than in Sangwell. You were also targeting something behind Cheney's gate. Leonard no longer had that aloof attitude as his eyes narrowed as he quickly left St. Samuel Cathedral's basement. In Hillston Borough, outside a building with quite a unique architecture, Dwayne Dantès got off his carriage and saw the building that was built in the style of the late 4th epoch. The building was mostly comprised of huge stone slabs, creating a total of 4 stories. The windows on each level were like a door and it was matched with a tiny balcony. Its entire facade had been weathered by the elements, revealing a sandy yellow color. The stone columns and arches held up a refined porch that made it seem rather magnificent. This was the East Balham Military Veterans Mess. Klein waved his cane and pointed at the building before him and said with a smile, "It has quite a historic feel." Member of Parliament Mocked nodded in reply. "It's actually a building built in an ancient style, but it has more than 100 years of history." As he spoke, he led Dwayne Dantès into the club and said to the lady at the reception, "Dwayne Dantès, unofficial member. I'll be his recommender." With that said, he turned to the tycoon and explained, "Not only have you not served in East Balham, but you have never participated in the wars that happened there. You don't even have a military background, so there's no way for you to be an official member. However, even being an unofficial member will allow you free entry and the use of the various facilities. You will be able to enjoy the delicious food and alcohol, and get to know different friends." "That's exactly what I was hoping for." Klein nodded with a smile. After the beautiful lady who was of Southern Continent descent finished the registration, Mocked added, "There's no admission fee. It's £60 a year for the membership." With that said, he chuckled and said, "It's not expensive, even more so for you. Here, you will get to come into contact with all kinds of weapons. There are enough shooting ranges to provide you with shooting practice. You can even learn horse riding. At a club of this level, £60 really isn't expensive. After all, generals often appear here, and they have many famous chefs." Klein didn't speak further as he took out his wallet. He counted £60 and gave it to the receptionist, obtaining a badge with the logo of a forest, ocean, and blades. "This is a place filled with glory. I'm deeply impressed with your contributions in East Balham." As Klein wore the badge with a number on its back, he said to Mocked, "If I wish to contribute to the cause, who should I look for?" Mocked pointed at the receptionist. "Just give it to her. She will jot it down and announce it on the notice board over there." Klein nodded slightly and said, "All right." He then turned his head and made Richardson take out the £500 he had already prepared. After giving the donation, Klein passed through the beautifully decorated foyer with Mocked, arriving at a room that resembled an activity room. As for his valet, Richardson remained outside in the break room. There were snacks, tea, and coffee there. In the small room, through Mock's introductions, Klein got to know 5 officers who were either still in service or were retired. Apart from a particular House of Commons member of Parliament, the highest-ranking epaulet was Colonel Calvin. He was presently working at the Lone Kingdom's Ministry of Defense. However, his actual position was unknown. According to what Klein knew, for quasi-high-ranking members of the military at the rank of colonel, they were mostly Beyonders, mid-sequence Beyonders. Mocked, Calvin, and company quickly began chatting. Klein didn't interject as he seriously listened to their conversations, occasionally echoing a sentence or two. In this relaxed atmosphere, Calvin suddenly turned his head and said to Dwayne Dantès, "I heard you were often active in West Balam?" The colonel had a long face like a donkey's, but it didn't look comical at all. His gaze was rather deep. Klein smiled and replied, "Yes, that place is more chaotic than East Balam." Calvin laughed when he heard that. Of course. Intis made too many mistakes over there. He paused and continued asking, "How is your relationship with the people from Intis over there?" Klein didn't understand the colonel's motive as he bit the bullet and said, "It's all right. They're all very greedy." In fact, he didn't know a single one. He had only heard Anderson mention a few names and their corresponding matters. Calvin nodded and raised another question. "Are you familiar with the tribes over there, as well as the resistance?" "I know some," Klein answered vaguely. He only knew one Intis military leader of the resistance. It was the former Intis princess, Queen Mystic Bernadette. Calvin laughed as he took a sip from his cup of red wine. During this process, no one spoke, including Mocked. After putting down his cup, Calvin looked at Dwayne Dantès again and said, "This is the thing, every year, we would obsolete many rifles and cannons. And directly destroying them or processing them is too much of a waste or costs too much. It's not a good solution. I'm not sure if you're interested in buying a batch and selling it to West Balam. You can sell it to the regions ruled by Intis, selling them to the tribes and resistance. Trust me. This is definitely a very lucrative business. Of course, it's also very dangerous. If you're caught by Intis in West Balam, we will disavow you." This is making me an arms dealer? This is one of the most lucrative businesses. Although I'm not familiar with West Balam at all and lack any connections, I can sell it to Queen Mystic or the resistance at the Rorstad archipelago. Klein was tempted as he deliberately wore a mixed and hesitant expression. "I've never done such things before, but it's definitely attractive enough." Calvin laughed and said, "There's no need to rush to a decision. This is a very important matter that requires serious thought. Just give your answer to Mocked before the end of the week." Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief and nodded with a smile. "All right. Tingen City. Raphael Cemetery." Although the afternoon sun was rather strong, this place remained gloomy and cold. Leonard was standing in front of a grave, staring silently at the tombstone. The sun hung brightly in midair. In a dark, silent corner of the cemetery, Leonard Mitchell suddenly raised the shovel beside him. The 2 mounds of soil at the side gradually raised in height as the coffin pit became obvious. From time to time, there would be passers-by, but they didn't notice anything, as though a dream was happening over there. Finally, Leonard threw the shovel and bent down. He reached out and grabbed the ends of the coffin lid with both hands. Using immense strength, he pulled open the heavy wooden lid and discovered that the thick, long nails had fallen off at some point in time. There was nothing inside the pitch-black coffin. Nothing. Leonard continued keeping his body hunched as he silently watched this scene without any further movement. He stood there like a petrified statue for a very long time. In his hazy dream, Klein saw a tombstone with an epitaph. It stood silently among many other tombstones as it was dyed in crimson moonlight. This scene shattered immediately as Klein snapped awake. He confirmed that he was still Dwayne Dantès and that he was still inside 160 Buckland Street's master bedroom. The dream seems to be telling me something. As a seer, Klein treated every dream seriously. This was no exception. He focused and shook himself out of his state of drowsiness before attempting to make an interpretation. That's likely a tomb. This represents a particular deceased or something related to resurrection. The crimson moonlight represents the goddess, corresponding to the Church of Evernight and the Nighthawks. If I were to directly see the moon, it might involve the primordial moon, vampire ancestor Lilith, and the mother tree of desire. The tomb was dyed with a color almost resembling blood. this symbolizes something bad. As Klein did an interpretation of the dream, he gathered all the content and attempted to make an effective, meaningful conclusion. After some serious thought, he began to believe that the dream's revelation was referring to the past him and the Church of Evernight. After making the connections with what had happened the past few days, Klein slowly came to an answer. As Dwayne Dantès has repeated headed for St. Samuel Cathedral, he must have been added to a list of suspects. If Leonard hasn't left Backland, this must have garnered his attention. After all, he knows that Dwayne Dantès isn't a simple person and has mysterious origins. As an angel from the Marauder pathway, Leonard's grandpa probably discovered that the Grey Fog and the Seer pathway has intricate ties, and knows that the corresponding sequence 0 is called the Fool. This way, they will naturally be able to make connections with the honorific name of the Fool that was previously spread, and they would believe that I'm a member of a secret organization that worships the Fool. And developing on this clue, it can also involve the person who killed Lenivus and hero bandit Black Emperor who used tarot cards. Along with the Gehrman Sparrow clues I deliberately left behind, as well as Leonard's previous investigations into Sherlock Moriarty, it's not impossible for him to put things together and find what's highly dubious. And in the beginning, Sherlock Moriarty's disguise wasn't too good. As long as Leonard investigates seriously, it wouldn't be difficult to discover that the great detective resembled his former colleague. So, he went to Tingen to dig up the grave for confirmation? As he thought about the matter, Klein pulled a back cushion over and sat up. He felt that he had already found the answer to his dream. He began seriously analyzing what could happen afterwards, considering if he should abandon the identity of Dwayne Dantès. Leonard has no way of conveying his theories and conclusion to the other Nighthawks because he won't be able to explain the key points for his inference. This will expose his own secret. Based on my experience and my understanding of him, he will steer the matter via different means. This will be more complicated and troublesome, wasting even more time. Before that happens, I should find him and give him another warning. It should snuff out whatever is on his mind. After all, the church didn't suffer any material loss, nor did anyone die. Yes, for Dwayne Dantès, I have taken note of the time. I specially created tracks of my activity in the southern continent over the past few months, staggering it with the decline of Gehrman Sparrow sightings. And this involves the Intis colony, so it will be rather difficult to verify the matter. That also means that Leonard has, at best, figured out that Gehrman Sparrow equals Sherlock Moriarty equals Klein Moretti. He will just believe that I'm in cahoots with them, part of a secret organization that believes in the Fool. To him, Dwayne Dantès is a powerful, mysterious beyonder who can sense the grandpa in him, a demigod. This is an obvious discrepancy with the other identities. Klein soon came up with countermeasures as he turned his attention to the matter he encountered at East Balham Military Veterans Mess in the afternoon. Why would they directly seek me out for such a private arms deal? I just established a friendship with Mocked and hadn't experienced any tests. I don't deserve such trust. Perhaps it's a test? In the beginning, it will just be rifles and cannons. The quantity would probably be limited. Nor will it involve high-quality items. Furthermore, I'll need to come up with the cash before receiving the goods. If I have any real problems, they wouldn't suffer any losses. They will only suffer the repercussions of a small batch of weapons falling into hands within their own domain of control. Yes, to them, a tycoon like me, with a complicated background and a deep understanding of West Balham, really is an excellent candidate. First, I have the money. Second, I have the guts. Third, I have the resources and social connections, allowing the arms to be sold to suitable factions. Fourth, I have no background in the upper echelons of the kingdom. I can always be made the scapegoat and be abandoned. They must have sent people to monitor me in secret. As long as this business is smoothly completed, I'll be a close partner with the military. This will aid in my investigations of the truth behind the Great Smog of Backland. The problem I have now is that I have zero actual knowledge of West Balham's resistance and various tribes. I've no idea where that fellow, Anderson, is. I don't have his method of contact either. Dantès might be aware of the situation in West Balham. Same for Ma'am Hermit. Likewise for Queen Mystic who's backing her. I'll first gather intelligence from these channels. Having made up his mind, Klein's working brain slowed down as a sense of drowsiness washed over him again. He let his body slide down bit by bit as he got under the blankets. In the basement of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard, who had returned from Tingen, managed to be in time for the team's internal meeting. Soest first briefed them on the conclusion of the Archbishop and what the other local Nighthawk teams had obtained. With the help from the Holy Cathedral, St. Anthony has confirmed that the infiltrator is Gehrman Sparrow. The conclusion is that this crazy criminal is still alive but doesn't exist in this world. This is truly a contradictory statement. I don't understand it as well. His Grace didn't explain anything either. In short, our focus will be on the investigation of Gehrman Sparrow. According to the information provided by MI9, Gehrman Sparrow is a fake identity. He originally came from Backland. After Soest finished the briefing, he asked, "Do you have anything to add?" Leonard opened his mouth and was just about to say something, but his eyes shimmered twice before he fell silent again. Soest turned his head and glanced at him, calling him out by name. "Leonard, did you discover any clues?" Leonard remained silent for a second before shrugging. "That clue has been eliminated." Soest didn't ask further as he looked at the other teammates. After a series of supplementary information and analysis, he began assigning missions to his Red Gloves team. After everything was assigned, Leonard Mitchell held a name list that required him to enter their dreams for a cross-check. He returned to the break room above and threw his body into bed. He sat there silently as he raised his hand to comb his hair, preparing to begin taking action. However, the first dream he entered wasn't anyone in the name list. His target was Dwayne Dantès. After repeated considerations, he decided to speak to this secret organization member, an undying monster from the fourth epoch, face to face. He wanted to see what information he could sound out. This looked somewhat rash, but with both parties knowing each other's secrets, it was still a good choice. 160 Buckland Street. Klein's drowsy mind suddenly became clear as he knew that someone had entered his dream. He pondered silently, sitting in a reclining chair and turning his head to look at the balcony. He saw a black-haired, green-eyed man wearing a white shirt and black vest nimbly leap inside. He was none other than Leonard Mitchell. "I haven't gone looking for you, and here you are coming to my doorstep." The other Nighthawks would politely knock on the door before entering. "Only you would jump into balconies," Klein lampooned as he looked at the poet approach him. At this moment, in Leonard's eyes, Dwayne Dantès was still wearing a formal suit in the dream. His sideburns were gray, and he had an angular face with an immense amount of charm. At this moment, the tycoon wore a smile, as though he wasn't hiding the fact that he remained lucid and that he wasn't affected by a nightmare. "Didn't Palazzoros teach you some manners?" Klein said with a tone he believed matched Leonard's impression of him. "Palazzoros. He's warning me again." Leonard was taken aback as he remembered the name. He quickly reined in his thoughts and bowed in a manner that lacked standards. "Please pardon me for the intrusion. You are on our investigation list. Was the infiltration done by you guys? Is that your goal for coming to Backland?" "No." Klein and his Dwayne Dantès guys raised the cup of red wine and sipped it. "It's not us, but just him alone." He put on an act that he wasn't afraid of Leonard knowing. "Gehrman Sparrow?" Leonard asked in a deep tone. Klein glanced at him with his deep blue eyes that seemed to have seen the vicissitudes of life. "Isn't that obvious? What does he actually want to do?" He didn't take anything away, Leonard took the opportunity to ask. Klein raised his hand to stroke his white sideburns and chuckled. "What do you think is the answer?" 853 Comparison of experience in Sophistry plus, turn off reset. What do I think? If I were to know the answer, why would I be here? I'd have long handed this information to my superiors. Leonard silently mumbled as he deliberated over his words. During this process, he discovered that, although he was standing straight and looking down on Dwayne Dantès, The tycoon who was sitting leisurely in the reclining chair held the aura of having the advantage. It was like a high-ranking personage casually listening to his subordinates' reports. This made Leonard feel a little uneasy. He subconsciously surveyed the area and pulled a chair over as he leaned back into it, half out of habit and half as a deliberate action. I believe he, or all of you are searching for something. Back in Tingen, he infiltrated the Nighthawks to search for something. In Backland, he also infiltrated Cheney's Gate to search for that item. His search was fruitless the first time, so he escaped by feigning death by using Nsangwil's assault. He still failed to find it the second time. Hence, he didn't take anything and directly left Cheney's Gate. While speaking, Leonard used a very certain tone to divulge that he had figured out that Gehrman Sparrow was Sherlock Moriarty and also Klein Moretti. He wished to use the effect of pressure to make Dwayne Dantès not appear that calm or have any thoughts of resorting to sophistry. Indeed, he went to dig my grave. Klein sighed inwardly as he chuckled. He picked up the glass of red wine and gently swirled it. Do you think that we would consecutively make 2 rash attempts before having any confirmed intelligence? You should know that such matters can only be done once. Once there's a failure, there's no way it can succeed again. Therefore, who would use an operation to verify one's guess when the target isn't clear? He has tacitly confirmed my explanation. Klein Moretti is Gehrman Sparrow, hero bandit Black Emperor, a member of the secret organization who believes in the fool. Leonard tried hard not to frown as he crossed his right leg and said, so, it's not that nothing was found, but that there was a failure due to other factors? During these 2 attempts, Tingen City's St. Selena Cathedral and Backland's St. Samuel Cathedral only shared 2 common items, sealed artifact 2-049 and the Antigonus family's notebook. Antigonus family's notebook. That's it? Klein Moretti joined the Nighthawks because of it. Although the process of inference is wrong, the answer is actually correct. Klein chuckled and said, our brains aren't there just for show. If his goal was the Antigonus family's notebook, there was no need for him to join the Nighthawks. Before you obtained it, he had plenty of opportunities. And even after you obtained it, he had no lack of opportunities to obtain it. You should understand the situation back then better than I do. Also, since the target was the Antigonus family's notebook, why didn't he take it away? Upon being mocked by Dwayne Dantès, Leonard Mitchell realized that the theory he came up with on the spot was filled with logical contradictions. He felt ashamed as he showed some anger. He slowly took a deep breath and said, then why would he infiltrate Cheney's Gate using 2 different methods? And not only didn't he take something away, but he didn't even leave anything behind. He even entered a strange state. Just as Leonard said that, he saw Dwayne Dantès with his gray sideburns produce a deep, profound smile. I'm not sure of the reason for the latter matters. Perhaps you should ask the Evernight Goddess. Goddess? What does he mean? Leonard instantly felt alarmed and puzzled. He found it unimaginable as to what had happened behind St. Samuel Cathedral's Cheney's Gate. Right on the heels of that, he heard Dwayne Dantès say with a deep laugh, as for your first question, I believe you are mistaken about something. Our organization's members come from different places and join for different reasons, choosing to change their own faith in the process. As for what happened before that, their lives remain their own. Just like me. I had a past and have a present as well. The reason why I came here is because of the last name I gave myself. Dantès. The return of the Count. He joined the secret organization that worships the fool for revenge, and came to Backland? Leonard nodded in thought. Klein paused for a few seconds as he casually sipped the red wine and wore a smile. He continued, similarly, he, who was resurrected because of the Antigonus family's notebook's curse, does it for vengeance as well. Klein had deliberately mentioned his present last name, Dantès, and mentioned revenge. It was to preemptively distinguish himself from Gehrman Sparrow and Klein Moretti. It was to prevent Leonard from later finding similar objectives between the two and begin making a deeper connection from the similarities. By personally mentioning it, it framed the listener's thought processes and made them subconsciously follow the logic of the content, thus, treating Dwayne Dantès and Klein Moretti as 2 completely different people. The only similarity was their thoughts of revenge. And in this world, there weren't only two Avengers. Leonard lowered his crossed right leg unknowingly as he leaned forward. Vengeance? Who does he wish to seek revenge on? After asking the question, the elegant and handsome middle-aged gentleman curled the corners of his lips. Lenivus and Insanguil. Insanguil. Leonard blurted out as he couldn't help but have his expression repeatedly change. Finally, he fell silent. His green eyes looked ahead, unfocused, his thoughts a mystery. Phew. After a long silence, Leonard exhaled and released his originally clenched hands. He asked with his voice a little hoarse, Lenivus was really killed by him? Of course, Klein secretly sighed as he replied calmly. Leonard's mouth gaped open as though he wished to say something, but he didn't. He tightly pursed his lips. Realizing that his goals had been met, he immediately changed topics and chuckled. If you have a similar goal or require help, you can also chant his honorific name. Perhaps you will receive a response. That secret existence, the fool? Leonard imagined that Dwayne Dantès was habitually proselytizing and attempting to develop the secret organization. Therefore, he didn't think further and replied with silence. Klein then laughed. By the way, help me pass a message to Pallas Zoroast. One of our organization's members encountered blasphemer Amon in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. This piece of information contained massive amounts of information, so much that Leonard was temporarily at a loss for a response. His mind kept reverberating with the relevant information. The Forsaken Land of the Gods? The Forsaken Land of the Gods that even the 7 churches are unable to find? Their secret organization actually has members who can enter the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Blasphemer Amon. Old man told me that he's hiding from a high-sequence beyonder with the last name Amon. He was heavily injured by Amon and had no choice but to parasitize me. Dwayne Dantès' tone and attitude really is like an undying monster who lived from the 4th epoch. He's also at the same or a similar level as old man. In front of him, I really don't feel any sense of superiority. I even feel like I'm lacking confidence. As his thoughts ran through his head, Leonard forced himself to focus. I'll pass on the message to him. Based on the circumstances after Leonard enters the dreams of others, it can be determined that the grandpa doesn't completely control his senses. Otherwise, he would definitely have an abnormal reaction when he hears the name Blasphemer Amon. Previously, Will Septon's words also corroborates this point. Only when my dear poet encounters true danger would the grandpa sense it and take action. Very good. He isn't a full parasite. As Klein interpreted the unspoken information, he smiled. You may leave. You can also relax. My goal isn't the Church of Evernight. My coming goals, not the ones of the past. Klein silently added inwardly. Leonard had already received enough information, thus, he didn't dare overstay his welcome. He got up and bowed. Then, he left Dwayne Dantès' dream. In a room on the back streets of St. Samuel Cathedral, Leonard woke up and heard the aged voice from the parasite in him echo in his mind. What did he say? Leonard deliberated over his words and said, he directly admitted to being a member of that secret organization that believes in the fool. Likewise for Klein Moretti, whose alias is Gehrman Sparrow. Their goal is for vengeance, their own vengeance. Pallas Zoroast fell silent for a second before saying, did he say how Klein Moretti could be resurrected? Or how did he fake his death to such an extent? Leonard recalled and said, the explanation he gave was a curse from the Antigonus family's notebook. Curse? At this point, Leonard discovered that Dwayne Dantès' choice of words was rather strange. He had described the power of resurrecting the dead as a curse. Pallas Zoroast didn't seem to have any questions about that. After a few seconds of silence, he said, what else did he say? Leonard didn't hide it from him and said frankly, he mentioned Blasphemer Amon, saying that a member of their organization met him in the Forsaken Land of the Gods. Old man, is that the Amon you mentioned? The aged voice replied after a while, probably. He paused for a moment before saying, I believe that Dwayne Dantès, no, the fool that's backing him might be some old friend of mine. Old man believes that he's at a higher level than Dwayne Dantès, or even higher. He's a grounded angel? Leonard thought and asked, which old friend? Palazoros didn't answer as he asked, are you going to find an opportunity to reveal the situation about Dwayne Dantès and Klein Moretti? Leonard suddenly fell silent and only heavily said more than 10 seconds later, not for now. Perhaps he and I, and them, have the chance of working together. And the church didn't suffer any material loss this time. The parasite inside him didn't say a word, as though he had fallen asleep. Leonard slowly looked up and read the information in front of him. His eyes turned dark as he muttered, he's overtaken me by leaps and bounds. Early morning, 160 Buckland Street. After Klein got out of bed and washed up, he didn't rush to leave the bathroom. He took 4 steps counterclockwise and headed above the grey fog. He then conjured the world Gehrman Sparrow and made the fake person pray piously. Honorable Mr. Fool, please pass on the message to Dantès. I need him to provide me information on West Balam. It's best if he includes his social connections. Also, get him to be careful of the Church of Evernight for the time being. Above the Golden Dream, Dantès, who saw the sun earlier than Backland, was holding a cup of malt beer as he sat in the shadows, hiding away from the vile sunlight. Lessons will begin in another 15 minutes. Captain said that a treasure hunter must have a sufficiently good grasp of mathematics. Sigh, this is really such a headache, but it's also something to look forward to. T. Dantès placed one hand on his knee as he downed a mouthful of beer. At this moment, the grey fog emanated in front of him. The blurry figure that looked down from above appeared as Dantès' ears resounded with Gehrman Sparrow's voice. Information on West Balam? Although we've been there to search for lost ancient treasure and got to know a few tribal natives, that is pretty much it. There won't be much that I can tell him about. This is so troublesome. I'll have to do all sorts of work again. Why does Gehrman Sparrow get involved in so many things? Dantès silently grumbled as he vigilantly glanced to his sides, afraid that the madman would suddenly appear. He drew a breath upon considering how he wanted to become stronger. He didn't wish to be of no help when his captain met with danger, having to shamefully hide at the back. Dantès slapped his face a few times with his free hand before standing up. He immediately left the shadows and found Iron Skin and Bucket. He asked them in detail about West Balam's situation and who he should ask for the various matters, only to obtain a unanimous answer, Captain Edwina Edwards, or Anderson Hood, who previously joined our bonfire on the ship. Will she be suspicious if I directly ask Captain, making her believe that I have a secret and am secretly working for someone else? But, I've no idea where that fellow, Anderson, has gone to. T. Dantès fell into a dilemma as he couldn't help but think about something else, recalling Gehrman Sparrow's last words. Be careful of the Church of Evernight. Dantès wasn't a fool. He knew that a matter that the crazy adventurer emphasized was something important. It also meant that he believed that he had a high chance of being an important target of the Church of Evernight. He would be wildly pursued by the Red Gloves. Apart from the Church of Evernight, the Church of Storms, and the military are targeting me as well. It's said that they have each sent a squad. Dantès thought as his heart palpitated. He soon revealed a puzzled and bitter look as he muttered to himself, but I haven't done anything. After passing the message about gathering information on West Balam to Admiral of Stars Catlia, Klein left the area above the grey fog and returned to the real world. Like every other day, he had his breakfast and had lessons. After he woke up from his afternoon nap, with Richardson's help, he changed into a formal suit for an excursion. He got into the carriage that had already been waiting for him at the door. Head to St. Samuel Cathedral, Klein leaned on the carriage wall as he instructed the carriage driver. He had decided to continue maintaining his identity as Dwayne Dantès. He believed that it was best if he didn't change his former persona. Therefore, he couldn't change the frequency of his trips to St. Samuel Cathedral. Nor could he donate less. Besides, this can effectively wipe away any suspicion they have of me. After all, it's hard to imagine that the criminal who infiltrated Cheney's gate hadn't stayed behind but would saunter into the cathedral as though nothing had happened. I'll have to thank Emperor Roselle for not plagiarizing criminal psychology. He didn't point out that intelligent criminals often return to their crime scene to admire their work and the helpless response of others. Klein mumbled inwardly as he took a sip of the black tea that Richardson had brewed. After moistening his throat, he glanced at his valet and asked, seemingly casually, "What is your deepest impression of East and West Balham?" Sitting beside him, Richardson didn't ask why. After some thought, he said, "East Balham is safer. West Balham is more chaotic." After giving a simple answer, Richardson turned to look at his employer, only to see Dwayne Dantès with his eyes half closed as though he wanted him to continue. Richardson scratched his ear and deliberated over his words. "There's also poverty, hunger, and whip abuse. People from East and West Balham originally worshipped death. Later, due to the perks of believing in the deities like the goddess, Lord of Storms, and the eternal blazing sun, allowing them to boost their statuses and receive protection from the cathedral, there was a large-scale change of faith. However, as the number of believers increased, that special status was quickly removed. The people of the lower class began worshipping death again in secret. It's more obvious for the more messy West Balham in regards to this point. The descendants of death often receive a great deal of support. This is what my father of mine occasionally mentions after he's drunk." Klein listened in silence and didn't stop his valet's recount, nor did he probe deeper. Soon, the carriage arrived outside St. Samuel Cathedral. Klein first took in the sight of the white flying pigeons before entering the prayer hall. He took off his hat and handed it together with his cane to Richardson. He randomly found a seat and looked at the altar in the darkness. He watched the stars and the dark sacred emblem as unease, embarrassment, and a lack of confidence arose in him. If he had guessed correctly, ever since he made contact with the holy sword and made a vow, the goddess had likely taken notice of him. Every time he entered the cathedral to pretend like he was praying, it had the feeling like the emperor's new clothes. I wonder what the goddess's opinion on this is. And what position is the church taking? I'll probe first. Klein clasped his hands and held it to his nose, looking as though he was praying seriously. After about 8 minutes, he slowly got up, walked to the donation box, took out £50, and piously threw it in. After doing that, Klein turned to the confessional along the sides of the hall and entered. Unlike most ancient confessionals, which were big wooden crates with 2 doors, the modern confessional was an independent spacious compartment. The confessor and the listening bishop were separated by a wooden partition, with each one of them having their seats. Using the dim light, Klein sat on the chair and listened to the bishop say with his mellow voice, "Do you have something you would like to say? The goddess cares about all her believers." Klein raised his right hand and tapped his chest 4 times in a clockwise fashion. "Praise the lady. I wish to confess that 2 days ago, the military came to me, wishing that I can sell a batch of firearms and cannons to West Balham, to add coal to the chaos there." After he said that, the bishop on the other side didn't immediately give him an answer, as though he was alarmed by the arms dealing. He was momentarily unsure as to how to organize his words. The confessional instantly ended up being wrapped in an awkward silence. "You became frightened just from that? Have you never encountered a confessor as frank as me? If I were to say that I'm currently plotting the murder of a demigod while hiding from the mother tree of desire and the true creator, wouldn't you be jumping up?" Klein lampooned as he continued, "I did enjoy the adventurer's life when I was young. I obtained my wealth through metal, blood, and fire. But I'm already sick of that life. I only wish for a peaceful future. I originally wanted to decline the offer, but I'm unable to overcome the greed in my heart. This is a sufficiently enticing business, and it helps me in obtaining a firm footing in Baklan's high society. I confess that I ultimately chose the bustle and chaos." The bishop on the other side finally had a response as he said with a gentle voice, "Don't be afraid. Don't waver. You don't have to feel guilt for a certain level of greed. As long as you don't harm the innocent or commit any of the crimes as written in the Bible." Go, follow your inner heart and make the choice you wish to make the most. Only this way can you truly understand the teachings and understand the truth of those words. There's no need to be put in a difficult position. Remember this. No matter what you do, sincerely being contrite and penitent is worthy of praise and forgiveness. May the goddess bless you. Praise the lady. Klein drew the crimson moon once again on his chest. His visit to St. Samuel Cathedral was to use the opportunity of a confession to inform the church of his intentions of engaging in arms dealing. He wanted to know their reaction, so as to pry into the goddess's attitude towards him. Without saying anything extra, Klein slowly got up and left the confessional. He walked down the aisle and went towards his valet, Richardson. At this moment, he saw a lady sitting in the corner of the prayer hall. She was wearing a hooded black robe with blue eyeshadow and blush. She had quite an uncanny sense of beauty. She was none other than spirit medium Daly Simone. Daly looked up and similarly noticed Dwayne Dantès. Her expression momentarily turned adrift as though she had fallen asleep while praying and had entered a dream. Klein nodded at her indiscernibly as a polite gesture. Then, he took his hat and cane from Richardson as he unhurriedly walked out of the hall. Daly retracted her gaze as she looked down at the pew in front of her before slowly closing her eyes. Walking out St. Samuel Cathedral, Klein stood by the side of the staircase and paused for 2 seconds. The white pigeon suddenly flew up in the square up ahead, blocking the sights of all who were taking in the scene. Less than 30 minutes later, in the basement, Leonard heard that Dwayne Dantès, who had previously been investigated, was about to cooperate with the officials. He was going to be a merchant who would sell arms to West Balham. What is he trying to do? Leonard frowned, little by little, completely at a loss as to what the undying monster's thoughts were. As he returned from St. Samuel Cathedral to 160 Buckland Street, Klein saw his white-gloved butler, Walter, walk up to him. "Sir, someone delivered a name card. He said that his employer wishes to visit you from 4 to 5, Walter said with a staid expression. Klein tried figuring out who the visitor was, but he had no clue. He nodded gently and said, "Who's his employer?" Walter darted his gaze around and saw that the other servants were rather far away. He then replied, "Baron Sindras." Baron Sindras. That millionaire tycoon who obtained his aristocratic title with the help of the Conservative Party and Duke Negan, and is also one of the most famous bankers and entrepreneurs in the kingdom? I previously helped Ma'am Mary purchase the Poin Company shares. The competitor happens to be him and his friends. He's visiting me personally for that matter? It's only a transaction worth about £13,000. It shouldn't be something that requires him to go this far. As Klein's mind raced, he walked to the staircase that led to the second floor. Walter walked half a step behind him as he said, "Sir, if you don't wish to meet Baron Sindras, I'll inform him that you got caught up at St. Samuel Cathedral, listening to the bishop's preachings, and might return very late." In between the lines, the butler was saying that Baron Sindras was a believer of the Lord of Storms. It was impossible for him to head directly to St. Samuel Cathedral to seek him out. Klein thought and smiled before gently saying, "This is a noble who has immense influence in the banking industry. I'll definitely come across him in the future, so I have to meet him." Arrange the meeting to be at the small living room on the second floor where there's the most sunlight. According to what Klein knew, Baron Sindras was the third largest shareholder of Backland Bank and the largest shareholder of Southville People's Bank. In Lone Kingdom's banking industry, he was definitely one of the few people with the greatest influence. "Yes, sir." Walter didn't nag on. At 4:10, Klein met the visitor who often appeared on the papers, in the predetermined living room. The only thing that was different and deviated from his expectations was that Backland turned cloudy after 3. The weather had turned dark and began drizzling. It didn't bring in the bright and warm sunshine. Baron Sindras was identical to how he looked on the papers. He had black hair mixed with some white hair that was neatly combed backward, revealing his broad forehead and receding hairline. His face was rather round, but it lacked the flesh needed to support it. His cheekbones were rather high, and his wrinkles were obvious. Unlike most Loanese his age, Baron Cinders didn't have any facial hair. He was clean-shaven, and his light blue eyes were nearly colorless. Beside him were a valet and bodyguard. They were the kind of people that didn't attract much attention. The former's greatest characteristic was his thin hair, while the latter had short hair if you didn't count the thick beard that reached down from his ears. "Good afternoon, Lord Cinders. It's my honor to have you here as my guest." Klein held his hand to his chest as he bowed. Usually, a host would mostly lean their bodies forward and reach out their right hand for a handshake when greeting a guest, but at this moment, he was in front of a noble, thus, requiring him to be more courteous. Baron Cinders nodded gently as he smiled in response. "You're being polite. I should have visited you a long time ago, Dwayne Dantès, an experienced gentleman who knows much about the southern continent." After exchanging some pleasantries, the two took their seats while the valets and bodyguards settled by the side. Klein was just about to say something when Baron Cinders said with a genial tone, "Dantès, I'm really impressed with people like you. Not everyone can obtain riches from the chaos in the southern continent. This requires plenty of guts and the courage to face adversity, as well as stunning judgment. Back when I was facing bankruptcy, I had entertained the idea of starting anew in the southern continent, but unfortunately, I'm not a brave man." Although Baron Cinders later became a noble, he wasn't a commoner in the true sense of the word. His great-grandfather and grandfather had benefited from the development of the colonies, earning them plenty of money from the sea trade. They were rather successful merchants. As for his father, he had invested in industries, building up his reputation and acquiring several factories. When it came to his generation, he blitzed into the developing banking industry with his sizable wealth, becoming one of the earliest millionaires in loan. During this process, Baron Cinders had suffered 3 failures, but he overcame them, one after another. The most harrowing incident was when the Southville People's Bank he founded suffered from a reputation crisis. A bank run happened, nearly bankrupting him. He keeps chatting about my experiences in the southern continent. Is he hinting to me that he has already discovered the problems with my background, and is using it as a warning? He probably never expected that the southern continent experience he keeps repeating is all fake. Klein scoffed inwardly, but he replied while looking absolutely normal, "That isn't courage but rashness. Most people who head to the southern continent do have the spirit of adventure, but that's all they have." Without waiting for Baron Cinders to continue, he smiled and said, "I nearly hired Mr. Reback some time ago as my butler. He said that you were an excellent employer." Baron Cinders listened in silence before sighing. "That is something that fills me with regret. Back then, I was very sincere in hoping that Reback could continue being my butler, but he couldn't overcome the conflict within our positions." Upon saying that, Cinders looked at the handsome and elegant Dwayne Dantès, picked up the black tea that had been served by a servant, and took a sip. "I also sincerely hope that we can be friends. I hope you can transfer the Poin Company's 3% to me. I will give you an offer you can't resist. Here it comes. But I have a contract with Ma'am Mary." Klein fell silent for 2 seconds and said with a smiling sigh, "I deeply value my trustworthiness." Upon hearing such an answer, Cinders didn't show any obvious anger. He smiled, curious and surprised. "Aren't you going to listen to my offer?" Klein deliberately spread out his hands with a wry smile. "I'm afraid I will find it irresistible." "Haha." Cinders immediately laughed and slowly stood up. "You're as humorous as they say. At the same time, you have a firm will that the rumors fail to mention." He looked at his bodyguard and valet before saying to Dwayne Dantès with a smile, "Being a partner with you is definitely better than being a competitor. Alright, it's time that I leave. There are many things that require my attention." Is this sincere praise or a veiled threat? Klein wasn't a spectator, so he wasn't able to interpret the subtleties. All he could do was shamelessly reply, "Likewise. I look forward to having the opportunity to cooperate with you in other domains, Lord Cinders." Dressed in a formal suit and a tie, Baron Cinders smiled and nodded. Without saying another word, he was led out of the main door by Dwayne Dantès and his butler and valet. As he watched the luxurious carriage disappear into the distance, Butler Walter suddenly said, "Sir, should I hire some temporary bodyguards?" Ah? Klein nearly failed to understand his butler. Seeing his employer's expression remain unperturbed, Walter added, "At times, competition in business can endanger one's personal safety." Mr. Butler also noticed the veiled threats by Baron Sindras? Klein curled the corners of his lips and said, "I'm not too worried because this is Backland. Because my name is known at the Church of Evernight. Because I'm about to cooperate with the military. Therefore, I'm not afraid of suffering any form of retaliation in the Beyonder domain, and I'm not afraid that matters will develop like with the Intis ambassador. Besides, Baron Sindras is a successful man with status and power. He won't be that rash." Klein thought inwardly. When Walter attempted to continue, Klein chuckled and said, "However, being careful is forever a good habit." You can hire 2 bodyguards. Let them secretly provide me with protection. Try to not have them be discovered by the servants at home." "Yes, sir," Walter immediately replied. Klein thought for a moment and said, "Make a trip to Member of Parliament Mock's place. Invite him to dinner at the Intis Renzo restaurant tomorrow along with his wife and daughter. If they have a prior commitment, we can postpone it to another day." He planned on informing Mock that he planned on taking the military's test and completing the small arms deal. The most convenient method was to visit Mock at his residence and mention it in passing, but considering how there might be a demigod of the marauder pathway around Hazel, any close contact might result in the aura of the gray fog on him being detected. Therefore, Klein changed his plans and decided to have the venue to be at a restaurant. This way, based on his judgment, the demigod which had failed to parasitize Hazel was unlikely to accompany her. Zio hid in the shadows of the woods as she watched a brown carriage slowly drive past and turn into a particular street in Empress Borough. There was an obvious coat of arms on the carriage. It was mainly a flower and 2 rings. They belonged to the captain of the Lone Kingdom's Royal Guards, Viscount Stratford. Realizing that she had made 0 discoveries, she gloomily left her hiding spot and took a nearby public carriage. She returned straight to the Backland Bridge area and walked into East Borough. Upon coming to the Dharavi Streets bar, Zio easily walked to the bar counter as the drunkards avoided her. She directly asked the bartender who was wiping a cup, "Any new jobs?" The bartender immediately smiled. "Yes. Butler Walter, who previously offered a £200 bounty for a few cheats, has offered a new job. It's very simple. Secretly protect his employer for a few days. The payment will be discussed face to face. It will definitely be a handsome reward. He was very pleased with your efficiency during the last mission. He requested that we give you priority. How about it? Are you interested?" Zio had a rather deep impression of the butler and his employer because they had spent £200 to seek out cheats who had only scammed £1,000 of cloth. Very generous, and he's quick to pay. Zio did a slight recall before nodding and saying, "All right." In an apartment in Sherwood Borough. Just as Zio entered, she caught the scent of fried food. She couldn't help but twitch her nose and looked towards the kitchen. "Furs? Would there be anyone else?" Furs peeked her head out from the kitchen and asked with a smile. Zio put down the papers in her hand, half surprised and half grumbling. "Do you still remember how long it's been since you stepped into a kitchen?" Making toast in the morning doesn't count." Furs returned to the kitchen, leaving only her voice behind. "I choose the food outside because they're better. And now, the surrounding streets don't have any good fried chicken. I suddenly had cravings for it. When it comes to Intis cuisine, I like it the most." Zio walked to the kitchen and leaned against the doorframe as she watched Furs busily prepare dinner. She deliberated and said, "I received a job. £100 a day. Ranging from 3 to 5 days, but I need another helper. Weren't you previously lacking in money? Why don't we do it together? Actually, my financial situation has improved. However, a mission that pays £50 a day isn't bad. I'll save up as much as I can. There will be plenty of places that require me to spend money in the future. As Furs watched her oil-filled pot, she asked, "What kind of job is it?" She had already calculated how much she could receive. Zio combed her slightly coarse blonde hair and said, "Secretly protect a tycoon named Dwayne Dantès." What did he encounter? Will it be very dangerous? Furs asked cautiously. Zio recalled and said, apparently there was some kind of business conflict, and his competitor has threatened him. This isn't anything dangerous. As you are aware, the powerful Beyonders in Backland wouldn't dare to take any risks, as it's easy to expose themselves, causing them to be targeted by the Nighthawks and mandated punishers. Perhaps the other party is a lunatic? You can't rule that out. While retorting, Furs naturally thought of the world Gehrman Sparrow. This gentleman was a lunatic who dared to pull off major upsets in Backland. She paused and scooped up the pieces of fried chicken. Since you've already accepted the mission and I have nothing coming up recently, let's do it together. It's good too. We will be protecting him in secret, so no one will discover that I'm a bodyguard. Otherwise, I'll have no way of participating in those literature saloons. Heh, actually, I can tell them that I'm experiencing life and gathering material. My next novel will be about a female bodyguard and her male employer. Zio was already used to Furs's penchant for letting her thoughts wander. She scrunched up her nose and said, "Let's head over after dinner." 160 Buckland Street. Klein had set up a ritual in the master bedroom's bathroom and headed above the gray fog. He planned on handling some random matters before the bodyguards hired by butler Walter came. It wouldn't be convenient for him to do them in the coming days. And among these random matters, the most important task was to confirm the situation with the creeping hunger. Sitting behind the seat belonging to the fool, Klein made the human-skinned glove fly out from the junk pile. After a series of divinations, he discovered that the creeping hunger was rather stubborn this time. None of the negative side effects had changed. It's a result of Mr. A's corruption, so it's absolutely not giving up its praise of the true creator. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he seriously considered the solution to this matter. Find another way to threaten it? No, how can I call it threatening? Under the premise of being proactive, I will be engaging in friendly communication with it. Klein rapped the corner of the long mottled table and muttered silently, "I'll be writing to Mr. Azek later anyway. I can also mention in passing that the creeping hunger seal is no longer effective. I can also bring some mushrooms along with me." No, that wouldn't work. Although it will stop the creeping hunger from praising the true creator, it will make it unusable. I'll get a few of the original mutated mushrooms from Frank to see if there are other effects. After determining his thought process, Klein threw Azek's copper whistle and the adventurer's harmonica through the door of sacrifice and bestowment before returning to the real world. He packed up the ritual items and wiped away any traces of the ritual. After leaving the bathroom, Klein walked to his study desk, taking out a fountain pen and paper as he deliberated over the things to say. Dear Mr. Azek, it's been a while since I've written to you. I wonder how you've been recently. Due to certain unforeseen circumstances, your seal on the creeping hunger is no longer effective. Can you give me the corresponding method? I wish to apply the seal on it again. Have you heard of creatures known as spirit world plunderers? What level are they, and what kinds of characteristics do they have? Where are they usually active in? I might be heading to the southern continent in the near future. If I obtain any new information on death, I'll write to you as soon as possible. Putting down the fountain pen and reading it twice, Klein folded the letter and blew the copper whistle. Silently, white bones spewed out from the floor, gushing out like a fountain into midair, forming a giant skeleton that was nearly 4 meters tall. The skeleton lowered its head to glance at Dwayne Dantès before bending its back, bending its right arm and spreading open its palm. This messenger is becoming more polite. Klein nodded in satisfaction, handing it the letter. The skeleton messenger didn't stay, and it immediately disintegrated, pouring down like a waterfall before rapidly vanishing. Klein silently heaved a sigh of relief as he retracted his gaze and continued writing a letter to Frank. The dried mushrooms you provided were pretty good. Do you still have more? Do you find the idea I previously mentioned viable? If you encounter any difficulties during the research process, you can write to me. After folding the letter, Klein blew into the adventurer's harmonica. He saw Miss Messenger Rionette Tinker appear by his side. She still lacked a head as she wore a complicated black dress while holding 4 beautiful blonde, red-eyed heads. "Can you lock onto Frankly?" Klein asked rather confidently. After all, Miss Messenger was unlike ordinary messengers. She was a spirit world creature at the demigod level. Under normal circumstances, a messenger could only locate the contractor or the person who held the summoning ritual. As for the latter, there was a limitation. Once the ritual was too far away, the messenger wouldn't be able to find them. Rionette Tinker's 4 heads turned in unison and looked at Klein. "Yes. It's that man who wants to plant everything, right? What did Frank do to leave such a deep impression on Miss Messenger? Back when I replied, she even said that she hoped that he wasn't dead." Klein nodded seriously. "Yes." Rionette Tinker's 4 heads spoke one after another. "Can locate. I labeled him." "Ah?" Klein turned agape, nearly forgetting his motives. "Poor Frank, no, the great and powerful Frank. He actually got Miss Messenger to specially label him. May the goddess watch over him." Klein silently exhaled and handed the letter to Rionette Tinker. "Please hand it to Frank. He will pay you the gold coin." One of the heads in Rionette Tinker's hand opened its mouth and bit down on the letter. Then, it directly entered the spirit world, unable to be sensed again. After dealing with these matters, Klein left the copper whistle and harmonica on him. He went downstairs to have dinner. Midway, Walter entered and whispered into Dwayne Dantès' ear, "The bodyguards have arrived. It's that Miss Zio and her friend from before. I will arrange for them to secretly provide you protection." "Miss Zio and her friend? Don't tell me it's Miss Magician." Klein was momentarily at a loss for words as all he could do was gently nod, acknowledging the new tidbit of information. His spirituality actually didn't sense that someone had infiltrated his house. However, this was very normal since it wasn't time for most people to sleep for the night. When it was that period of time, any abnormalities became rather obvious. Therefore, unless Klein specially used his spirituality to leave undetectable marks at key spots, or if the intruder had plenty of ill intentions towards him, he would find it difficult to notice them. In a bedroom on the 3rd floor, Zio and Furs each took a window. Through the glass, they looked down at the garden. "This is my dream house. When I have enough money, I'll buy a house just like this in a scenic area. No, I'll still choose Backland. There are more delicacies here, and it's more convenient," Furs said sincerely. With that said, she sighed inwardly. "Unfortunately, I have the curse of the full moon. I can only continue improving myself. Otherwise, I'd have kept a house instead of selling it for cash." Zio traced her friend's gaze and looked outside, whispering, "I lived in such a residence when I was little." Furs stole a glance at Zio. As she had no idea what to say, she changed topics. "How should we provide him with protection?" Zio retracted her gaze. "When Mr. Dwayne Dantès is home and without guests, we'll just hide in the room and watch the surroundings to prevent anyone from infiltrating. When there are guests, we'll head to the adjacent room and keep close attention to any developments. We'll open the door at any moment to save him. If Mr. Dwayne Dantès were to head out, the butler will inform us ahead of time. I'll hide underneath the carriage to protect him while you'll follow on another carriage." "Zio, you're becoming more and more professional." Furs seriously praised her before chuckling. "I saw Mr. Dwayne Dantès' portrait just now. If you hadn't told me that the danger arose because of a business conflict, I would have suspected that the problem arose because of love." Before Furs finished her sentence, she suddenly saw a carriage stop outside the compound. Following that, a few policemen in black and white checkered uniforms got out of the carriage. "What's happening?" She looked at her friend and found Zio looking equally puzzled. Inside the living room on the 2nd floor, Klein met the 4 officers. Mr. Dwayne Dantès, do you know Mr. Quarren? Quarren? Klein tried recalling and remembered that it was the gentleman who had sold him the Poin company shares. Yes, what happened to him? Klein asked calmly. The officer that led the team replied in a rather polite manner, he committed suicide. In addition, he left behind a will, accusing you of forcing him to sell his shares and torturing him using all kinds of underhanded means, causing him to suffer from severe depression. And his family has provided proof regarding the contents of his will. Quarren committed suicide? His will accused me of forcing him to sell his shares? His family can even provide evidence? As Klein listened to the officer's description, he digested the relevant information and produced questions in his mind. After he understood the situation, his first reaction was, Baron Sindras has taken action. This powerful banker didn't hesitate to carry out his follow-up action against me after failing to cooperate with me, treating me as an enemy. He didn't hold back. Furthermore, he has clearly gathered enough information to know that Dwayne Dantès is involved with the Church of Evernight and Member of Parliament Mocked and the faction backing him. If he were to directly deal with me, it would easily attract unwanted trouble. Therefore, he chose to strike at the other end of the transaction, Quarren. This will be more indirect and safer, but it would be equally treacherous and ruthless. This is an utter disregard of an ordinary person's life. Klein suddenly recalled the innocent people who collapsed during the Great Smog of Backland. He couldn't help but feel a sense of rage surge within him as it bubbled to the surface but was ice cold. Klein used his clown powers to control his facial expression, making him look even more surprised as he asked, seemingly finding the situation incomprehensible, "Are you certain you aren't joking?" The leading officer nodded solemnly. "If we didn't have sufficient clues to support it, we wouldn't disturb a gentleman like you. Mr. Dwayne Dantès, I'll have to trouble you to follow us to the station for further investigations." Despite looking unperturbed, Klein's mind was racing. Just as he was about to say something, he suddenly noticed something illogical. Regardless, murder is a serious crime in the current Lone Kingdom. With Baron Sindras' identity, status, and social connections, he will have at least a few dozen effective means to deal with a foreign tycoon that just came to Backland 2 months ago. There's no need to go this far. After all, as a member of high society, he will more or less understand or be in contact with beyonder powers. He knows that there are all kinds of incredible means to pursue the true murderer. Unless he's completely confident, taking the risk to frame someone for murder is definitely the worst choice. If Sindras were to use his authority to suppress the investigations of the official beyonders, it will definitely be more effective and simpler to employ other means. Even if he temporarily isn't aware that I'm about to work with the military, he's definitely aware of my connection with the Church of Evernight and Member of Parliament Mocked. He wouldn't do things in such a simple and brazen manner. Most importantly, even if he's the kind of murderer who would kill for 3% shares, why didn't he do it earlier? He could have held Quarren at gunpoint early on, resolving the matter without causing any fuss. Klein glanced at the officers in front of him while in thought without immediately giving an answer. And in an adjacent room, Xiao and Furs were leaning against the wall. Using the latter's ability to open a small door, they didn't miss any parts of the entire conversation. What do we do? If the police want to arrest him, do we still provide protection? Furs, who lacked the experience of a bounty hunter, hurriedly suppressed her voice as she asked her friend. She never expected that the business conflict would result in a case of murder and suspicion of framing. The enemy she had imagined had transformed from an infiltrating murderous bandit into a police officer. She was momentarily unsure of what to do. Xiao was also in a dilemma. Usually, a bodyguard will only deal with illegal encroachers. But they have given a sufficiently sizable remuneration. Furs was surprised and amused by the response as she asked, "If he really is imprisoned, are you thinking of breaking him out of jail? Let's put aside the problem of danger. That way, you too would be wanted, and you won't be able to be a bounty hunter again. When the time comes, do you plan on fleeing elsewhere with this gentleman?" As she spoke, Furs, who had already come up with a story, discovered that Dwayne Dantès had a response. This elegant gentleman with white sideburns turned to look at Walter and said with a calm and gentle voice, 2 matters. First, visit Baron Syndra's and tell him that someone is trying to frame him. Walter revealed a rare look of surprise and confusion, finding his employer's instructions incomprehensible. From his point of view, this matter was highly likely to be machinated by Baron Syndra's. It was pointless visiting him, as it would only result in mockery. Klein smiled. He was a guest recently, and he had threatened me for the shares. Following that, Mr. Quarren met with his demise. I find it hard to believe that he wouldn't be under suspicion. Therefore, I believe that it's necessary to warn him. This is what a gentleman should do. The officers were slightly perturbed by what was said. They had the inexplicable feeling that the matter was more complicated than they had imagined. As for Walter, he was somewhat enlightened as he replied, "Yes, sir. I'll immediately visit Baron Syndra's and inform your friends and his of this matter. This way, if this wasn't done by Baron Syndra's, all subsequent trouble would be dealt with by him. If he were the mastermind behind this, by involving him in the name of kindly warning him and spreading the news, it could create sufficient pressure from public opinion. It would make it easier for Member of Parliament Mocked and company to rescue him. Smart. A good butler really helps." Klein silently praised him as he continued, "Second, please call for my lawyer to handle this tiny inconvenience." After instructing his butler and valet, Klein looked at the few officers in front of him. "All right, I'll follow you back to the station. I won't make things difficult for you. However, I wouldn't answer any of your questions before my lawyer arrives." The leading officer heaved a sigh of relief as he said with a nod, "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Dantès." At this moment, in the adjacent room, Furs hurriedly said, "Are we following?" "Yes. I'll hide underneath the carriage now and follow it to the station. We can't be certain that those police officers are real ones." Xiao replied rather cautiously. She paused, seizing the moment to ask, "What else do you wish to say?" Furs thought for a moment and poignantly said, "Nobles and tycoons are truly terrifying." Xiao was taken aback. She didn't speak further as she walked to the window. Supporting herself with one hand, she nimbly jumped down, landing in the shadows of the building. A few minutes later, Klein and 2 officers boarded a carriage belonging to Dwayne Dantès. When he sat down, he looked at the thick carpet, his expression the same as before. At the police station, Klein was directly brought to an interrogation room. However, he didn't give a response, regardless of what the officer asked. Only when his lawyer arrived did he give an account. He said that he had only met Quarren once. He also mentioned that the negotiation of the share purchase was completely handled by a professional team, hence, he didn't personally involve himself in it. He repeated his statements, saying that he was unaware of anything else. This left the interrogator at a loss until he was called out of the room. After a while, the officer responsible for recording the statement walked in and said, "All right, you may leave. A gentleman with an honorable status has vouched for you and paid for your bail." Klein didn't immediately stand up as he continued sitting in the chair. He looked up and asked, "Who is it?" The officer said with a respectful tone, "Baron Syndra's." Klein immediately revealed a smile as he slowly got up. He left the interrogation room with his lawyer before meeting up with his butler and valet. At the entrance to the police station, he met Baron Syndra's once again. This powerful banker's hair was still neatly combed back, with silver and black interweaving with each other. Beside him was a valet and his bearded bodyguard. "Thank you for your warning, Dantès. Few people would be so calm and sharp when they encounter such a sudden turn of events." Syndra smiled as he took 2 steps forward, reached out his palm, and shook Klein's hand. Klein replied with a smile, "I was simply trusting your character." Syndra's obviously didn't believe such lip service. He found an excuse and, with his bodyguard, boarded Dwayne Dantès' carriage. As for his valet, he sent him off to his luxurious carriage to instruct the carriage driver to follow behind. As parasol trees flew past outside the carriage window, Syndra spoke first. "Dantès, how did you come to such a judgment?" Klein glanced at his butler and valet beside him and chuckled. 2 points. First, I believe that you will have a better solution. You wouldn't do something this violent. Cinders drank a mouthful of white wine on the carriage as he chuckled. Indeed. The corners of Klein's mouth twitched as he said, I'm very curious as to what kind of methods you would employ. He had only asked in passing, without the extravagant hopes of obtaining an answer. However, Cinders chuckled and said, with matters developing this far, it doesn't matter if I tell you. It's very simple, isn't your goal to enter high society? I plan to hire women of different ages. They will accuse you on different social occasions that you toyed with their feelings and bodies, but you refuse to be responsible for your actions. If necessary, I'll find a few toddling children to clasp you around the legs, calling you PA. Perhaps I might get some civilians to accuse you of seducing their wives and destroying their marriage. This is Lone, a rather conservative place. No one would wish to have such a person as a friend. Likewise, the Church of Evernight who values marriage and family will also distance itself from you. It will be difficult to clear the air on such matters, yet, it wouldn't be a big deal. They wouldn't use their resources to help do an investigation for you. By the time you eventually find a loophole, your image would be hardened and known by all. How many people do you think will believe your explanations? You are just a newcomer and have yet to build a reputation. You aren't that trustworthy. Of course, if you were willing to accept my conditions, I'd stake my reputation for you. That will be the first step. Now, it wouldn't happen. Klein was almost stunned by what he heard. He found himself too inexperienced compared to a seasoned banker who had established a commercial empire for himself. I believe I should thank you, he replied with an unfazed smile. Second, if you really wanted the 3% shares, I wouldn't be your match when it comes to wealth. It would ultimately be better to force Mr. Quarren rather than killing him after the sale is completed. Cinders raised his right hand and pressed his fingers to the corner of his forehead as he chuckled. No, you're mistaken. I was bent on obtaining the 3% share. However, you're right about one thing. I did prepare an irresistible offer for Quarren, but he suddenly made a decision and completed the deal with you at an extremely fast speed. It caught me by surprise. Klein narrowed his eyes slightly as he suddenly fell silent. Returning to 160 Buckland Street, Zio circled the area and entered the third floor again, seeing Furs who had easily entered by using door opening. How is it? Nothing happened, right? Furs, who had only followed from a distance away, asked curiously. Zio shook her head in a slightly wooden manner. No. She then revealed a poignant expression. Nobles and tycoons are truly terrifying. This is referencing Mark Twain's Running for Governor, a common piece of literature taught to Chinese middle school students. On the tiny balcony of the master bedroom, Klein stood behind a railing in the form of Dwayne Dantès. He silently watched Baron Cinders' luxurious carriage depart. His mind was still resonating with the conversation he just had. He believed that there had been a secret plot behind the acquiring of the Poin Company's shares from the very beginning. According to Cinders, although the Poin Company has great potential and bright prospects, its current value is only limited to Backland. It's constrained by many conditions, making it not worthy for a powerful banker to place such great importance on it that he had to take on a stance of being hell-bent on acquiring it. After all, even if he didn't succeed, it would only be a difference in monetary profit. It wouldn't result in any losses. For the seller, Quarren, it's very normal to be under external stress to sell his shares for cash. It's also very normal for him to be unwilling to see Moneybags Baron Cinders from the Conservative Party. But herein lies the problem. As a businessman, faced with a deal that isn't considered important, the political inclinations are something to be considered when prices are similar. There's no reason to reject the possibility of receiving an extremely high premium. Yet, he had deliberately rushed to close the deal with Dwayne Dantès before Cinders could make his final offer. It's as if he has a grudge with money or views the Conservative Party with extreme prejudice. And this doesn't match the current political climate. The Lone Kingdom's internal politics hasn't reached such a splintered state. From the looks of it, someone is forcing Cinders to do this, and someone had designed a trap, using Quarren's 3% shares as the bait and me as the cover to lure Cinders into the trap, wishing to achieve a certain goal. Klein looked at the street lamps under the night sky as he sighed poignantly. Based on my assumption, if I hadn't discovered the problem tonight and hadn't sent someone to Cinders, the subsequent developments would definitely have me crushed by all kinds of seemingly incriminating evidence. And when the military or the Church of Evernight intervenes, there will undoubtedly be a twist in the evidence, incriminating Cinders. During this process, just a tiny misjudgment on Cinders's part will result in him treating Dwayne Dantès as an accomplice of the mastermind behind this ploy. He would use a rather intense method in response, hammering the final nail in my coffin. As for who the mastermind was and their true goals, Klein had no idea. All he could do was confirm that Ma'am Mary likely wasn't aware of the truth. She was only used due to her anxiousness to preserve her control over the Poin company. In short, she wasn't qualified to be deeply involved in the mastermind's ploy. Environment protection. New party. Conservative party. Bankers. Acquisition. Framing. One word after another surfaced in Klein's mind, seemingly allowing him to see through the present calm and backland. He saw the dangerous stirrings that were hidden beneath the surface. They existed for a long time and hadn't been quelled because of the Great Smog. It was even possible that it was just an extension of the tragedy. When all of these meshed together, mixed with the tense international environment, Klein suddenly thought of a word: revolution. In that second, Klein seemed to catch a whiff of the impending storm. Together with the prophecy of the apocalypse, I wonder how much chaos and madness are brewing in secret. Currently, my main goal is to start from the military and investigate the truth behind the Great Smog of Backland. If I were to get caught up in this maelstrom, there's a high chance I'll get involved in unnecessary trouble. Perhaps it might expose my sequence powers, preventing me from continuing my act as Dwayne Dantès. Klein retracted his gaze, having made up his decision. It was to quickly extricate himself from the matter. As for Cinders' safety, he wasn't too worried. First, the former had the Conservative Party backing him, and he had his own faction. With him on alert, it would be difficult for him to suffer any further harm. Second, Klein didn't have any deep ties with him, thus, providing a warning had already spoken volumes of his character. As for the truth behind Quarren's death, he had no right to carry out any investigations. All he could do was trust in the Nighthawk's rich experience and the myriad of means to have a chance of finding the real clues. How should I extricate myself? As long as the shares are with me, it implies that I'll ultimately remain center stage. Get Ma'am Mary to acquire it ahead of time? That will be very difficult. She likely doesn't have the funds. Sell it to Cinders? That will be in violation of the contract. Amidst Klein's flurry of thoughts, he gradually had an idea. His facial muscles twitched a little for some baffling reason before they relaxed. This was because what he wanted to do was something he had planned on doing but lacked the ability to do so. Furthermore, it would also benefit him by establishing an image, bettering his chances of entering high society. In the room adjacent to the balcony, Xiao and Furs were observing the streets and garden. One of them was looking at the crimson moon that was half hidden behind the thick clouds. There was a prolonged silence. Only when Dwayne Dantès' lights were extinguished did Furs turn to look at her friend. She said in excitement and clear poignancy, "Being a tycoon sure isn't easy. If you were him, you might have gone bankrupt in 3 days and be sent to jail." Xiao shot her a glance and said, "I can hire a powerful butler, a professional lawyer, and a capable business secretary to help me." Furs didn't continue putting her down as she said with a smile, "If I were you, I would change all of it to cash, bonds, and property. I'll use the annual income they bring about to maintain a decent life." Just as she said that, she saw Xiao frown slightly. She cast her gaze towards the first floor. What happened? Furs tensed up. Xiao observed for a few seconds before saying, "My spiritual perception tells me that an item or matter related to black magic has appeared." One of the biggest advantages of a sheriff was that when they were close enough, they could sense matters related to evil, chaos, and madness that weren't screened. Black magic? Furs was considered a senior beyonder, so she wasn't unfamiliar with that. Strictly speaking, anything that didn't pass through the 7 orthodox deities was considered as black magic. It included ritualistic magic that prayed to secret existences. In the typical sense, black magic referred to the use of flesh and blood, hair, and all kinds of strange items to cast strange spells. It partially involved evil gods, ones beyond our powers, the spirituality of the materials used, and the correct symbols and magic labels. Xiao nodded heavily and said, "Yes, it's on the first floor. I plan on taking a look. Stay here to protect Mr. Dantès." Furs kept silent for 2 seconds and nodded without wasting any time. "Okay." After Xiao left the balcony's half-open room, Furs took out Lamino's travels from a hidden pouch, prepared to immediately take action if anything amiss happened. Elsewhere, Xiao nimbly and briskly arrived at the first floor. Following her senses, she arrived outside a room. After confirming that the target was inside, Xiao was surprised as her expression gradually darkened. If she didn't remember wrongly, this room likely belonged to butler Walter, who had hired her. During her momentary daze, the black magic item or matter which triggered her spiritual perception vanished. Calm returned to the room as though nothing abnormal had happened. Xiao hurriedly pressed her ear to the door and carefully listened, confirming that there was the breathing of a human inside. After waiting for a while and seeing that Walter wasn't doing anything else, she returned to the 3rd floor with a look of suspicion. She recounted her findings to her friend and finally said, "Do we feign ignorance, or think of a way to remind Mr. Dantès?" First thought and said, "Perhaps the butler doesn't have any ill intentions? Let's keep observing." After deciding on their stance, she sked in wonder. "I have to say that Mr. Dwayne Dantès is a really pitiful person. Not only was he used by others to harm Baron Sindras and get framed, nearly throwing him into jail and losing his reputation, but he also has a butler who researches black magic with an unknown motive. Sigh, I hope he doesn't lose his life because of that. On this front, he's only a helpless commoner." Xiao nodded in agreement. "If we're unable to determine the butler's intentions after 3 days are over, we can leave a slip for him to warn him." The next morning, Klein glanced at Walter in a normal fashion after having breakfast before leaving home with Richardson. He rode a carriage to St. Samuel Cathedral. After the preaching and prayers, Klein didn't make any donations. Instead, he directly came to Bishop Electra. "Is there something?" Although this bishop was under immense stress due to the infiltration of Cheney's Gate, he was still rather friendly when dealing with the faithful. Klein smiled and replied, "I've recently been involved in certain matters and have come to recognize my true self." Without waiting for Electra to inquire, he continued, "I wish to establish a foundation that targets the poor. I hope that they can receive help from the church. I will place the Clem Company shares I have on hand into this foundation, so as to kickstart this initiative using all the funds obtainable from the contract." Electra was nearly stupefied by what he heard because it was definitely a sizable sum. Although it wasn't public knowledge how much Dwayne Dantès spent on acquiring the 3% shares, just from the relevant sources of information, it was estimated to be over £10,000. Furthermore, the future returns were nothing to scoff at. And back then, Ma'am Mary had been pursued by many men of status who had wealth in the range of tens of thousands of pounds. Therefore, for Dwayne Dantès to suddenly donate more than £10,000 was definitely considered a generous move. In the whole of the Church of Evernight, apart from donations from a deceased's will, there were only a handful of one-time donations that exceeded this amount. "This is an act that deserves all kinds of praise," Electra said from the bottom of his heart. "However, I have the obligation to remind you that you shouldn't do something that exceeds your reach." Klein smiled and replied, "This isn't a small sum for me as well, but it's still acceptable. It wouldn't affect my life and business." Electra's smile gradually turned warm as he said with a nod, "The goddess will definitely watch you." Upon hearing this blessing, Klein's expression nearly froze. Electra continued, "I will report the matter to His Grace and try to organize a charity party for this foundation. When the time comes, I'll invite the goddess's faithful from different domains. They will include powerful aristocrats and their families. Let's see if there are more people who are willing to participate. He knew very well that Dwayne Dantès was attempting to enter high society, therefore, he had deliberately made mention of powerful aristocrats. In the bottom cabin of the future where it was pitch black, Frank lit a candle which illuminated a table covered with flesh, mushrooms, wheat, and fish. He casually pushed the items away and cleared out a space that was just enough to accommodate a piece of paper. Right on the heels of that, he spread out a piece of paper, picked up a fountain pen, and wrote with an excited expression. My dear friend, Gehrman Sparrow, I'm delighted to know that you found the dry mushrooms to be pretty good. Perhaps it's more useful than I imagined it to be. When I'm free, I'll take another look at them. As I've been fully focused, in both body and mind, in the experiment you mentioned, I've already stopped all other creations. Most of the mushrooms have been burned away by Nina, leaving me with the last 3. I hope it will be of help to you. Placed together with them are my latest products. One of them is a type of mushroom that grows by feeding on flesh and blood. They have 3 breeds. The first is crossbred with wheat and can be ground into a mushroom powder that can be used to make bread. Another has the characteristic of being mixed with milk, allowing milk to be drawn from them. The last has been crossbred with fish. They come with a refreshing taste and it has a thick meaty texture. The things to take note of is that they are absolutely not to be eaten raw. They need to be cooked in 90 degrees Celsius hot water for at least 5 minutes so as to kill any living characteristics, otherwise, regardless of what it turns into, it will absorb the flesh and blood around it, including human organs. Another point. It's unable to distinguish between normal flesh and monster flesh, nor can they deal with the latter properly. They will accumulate with the corresponding toxicity and madness. I think they will experience different mutations because of the different types of monster flesh, producing different kinds of danger. However, I wasn't able to verify that, because I lack a sufficient number of monster corpses. If you were to obtain one while adventuring, please mail me one. I only need a tiny amount. As for any other problems that might exist, I'm not sure either. It's still a prototype, preventing further attempts and observation. I wish you all the best and to have a bountiful time adventuring. Sincerely, your friend, Frank Lee. After putting down the fountain pen, Frank read his reply in its entirety before folding in satisfaction. He found a gold coin and placed it over the letter. He quickly set up the messenger summoning ritual in preparation to chant the incantation. At this moment, he subconsciously surveyed his surroundings and was stunned. Then, Frank moved the nearby pile of soil out the door. In Empress Burrow, the opulent villa of Earl Hall, Audrey was hiding in her room, observing the glass bottle in her hand. In the bottle was a translucent, colorless, sticky liquid. It was like a mirror when still, completely reflecting everything within its vicinity. When undulations happened, a very tiny whirlpool would silently spin beneath the surface. This was none other than the hypnotist potion which she had just successfully concocted. Audrey had already digested her psychiatrist potion and planned on advancing to sequence 6 before Backland's psychology alchemists contacted her. After using placate to quell her mental state, Audrey gently bit down on her lip, raised the glass bottle, and downed the potion. After a brief chill, she suddenly felt her mind seem to explode. Her body also seemed to be contaminated as it turned somewhat incorporeal. At that moment, her soul body, astral projection, and ether body were being absorbed and assimilated by her body of heart and mind. Her entire person was like an amalgamation of pure thoughts that began churning. She felt the boundless sea of collective subconscious which connected all living creatures, and she sensed the spirituality sky that stood in contrast. Having experienced the sense of alarm she received during her psychiatrist advancement, Audrey didn't panic. She ultimately maintained a sliver of lucidity and curbed her instinctive urge to fuse into the sea. She allowed her consciousness to spread out in all directions before contracting like a rubber band. After an unknown period of time, she finally found her inner self. She saw the back of her hand covered in dense, firm golden scales and saw that the hair on her shoulders turned luxuriant and heavy, as though they were really made of gold. After these anomalies receded, Audrey quickly recovered. However, when she looked into the mirror, she found her green eyes appear clear, but deep down was a strange bottomless whirlpool. It made it difficult for others to shift their gaze away from them, easily drowning within them. This is a sign of the dispersing spirituality that has yet to have been fully converged. Audrey slowly eased her brows as her smile turned bright. She looked at herself in the mirror and nodded gently, finding it hard to hide her smile. Audrey, you are already a sequence 6. After she calmed her emotions, she seriously introspected herself to determine her new beyond her powers and the qualitative changes. After some work, Audrey came to a rough understanding of the situation. First, her constitution had received a significant enhancement. Be it her strength or agility, it had exceeded an ordinary person's. She could also form a layer of scales over her skin, largely resisting and reducing any damage. Second was a qualitative change in psychological cue. It became a form of hypnosis within the non-combat domain. As long as she made the target focus on something, Audrey could open the door to their body of heart and mind and directly alter their conscious and affect their subconscious. This way, the target wouldn't notice that they were abiding by her arrangements, taking actions that didn't match their true intentions. Of course, if Audrey's arrangement directly harmed the target's life or something he subconsciously placed great importance to, then the target would produce an intense resistance, causing the hypnosis to fail. In addition, if the target had a strong soul and firm body and mind, they would be able to resist the hypnosis to a certain extent. Third, battle hypnotism. Audrey could forcefully hypnotize an enemy, making them do something abnormal, such as attacking their companions or avoid her, the hypnotist. However, such hypnosis only lasted for short periods of time. The target would quickly snap awake and sense the problem. Similarly, it was unable to harm the target's life and make the enemy commit suicide. Fourth was psychological invisibility. With one's control of the target's body of heart and mind, allowing oneself to remain in the blind spot of one's consciousness, she could achieve the effect of invisibility despite someone standing in front of her without being able to sense her. Very impressive. My only regret is that I still lack beyond her powers that can launch direct attacks. Audrey puffed her cheeks in an indiscernible manner as she tried hard to converge her spirituality and make her eyes less intoxicating. After mostly eliminating her abnormalities, she opened the door and let Susie in. With the help of her golden retriever, she began familiarizing herself with her new beyond her powers. Before long, her lady's maid, Annie, knocked on the door and entered with an invitation letter in hand. My lady, the church will be organizing a charity party on Saturday night for a newly established bursary foundation that's targeted at the poor. They have invited you. Audrey didn't directly agree as she asked, did they invite my parents? Yes, they were also invited, as well as Lord Hibbert, Annie replied honestly. Audrey nodded and said with a smile, tell the church that I'll be participating. Also, figure out the exact situation with the charity foundation so that I can better decide on the amount to donate. In the evening at the Intis restaurant. This place is truly dazzling. It's much prettier than the living rooms and activity rooms of many nobles. Furs looked around as though she was here to gather material. Although she had participated in many noble organized literature saloons, she had always visited them at their residences and not at such top-end restaurants. Zio grabbed at her coarse blonde hair. This is the style of Intis. It's different from us. It might look pretty, but it lacks substance. How does it lack substance? Look, those are all famous oil paintings and sculptures. Furs deliberately retorted. During this process, she suppressed her voice, as they hadn't entered by the main door. As she spoke, she found the private room mentioned by Walter. Furs directly used door opening and pulled Zio in. They hid inside a pantry cupboard and waited for their target of protection, Dwayne Dantès, and his guests to arrive. How much do you think the 3% shares of Poin Company is worth? Bored, Furs casually asked. In the morning, she had entered St. Samuel Cathedral with Zio to provide protection while feigning prayer. Zio hesitated and said, at least several £1,000s. The bishop seemed to place a great deal of importance on the matter. How rich. Donating thousands of pounds just like that. Why doesn't he save poor people like us? Firs said pointedly in a joking manner. At this moment, the door to the room opened. Dwayne, Dantès and Mock's family walked in and took their seats. The waiters also started rushing around. Xiao and Firs didn't speak further as they eavesdropped on the chit-chat outside as they observed the surrounding situation. From time to time, their noses would twitch because of the food's fragrance. Suddenly, Xiao frowned as though she had sensed something before quickly easing her brows as though nothing had happened. What's wrong? Firs leaned in towards her friend's ear and whispered. Xiao shook her head. Nothing. I was uptight, causing me to overreact. At that moment, Klein put down his fork and knife, glancing to the side with a normal expression. In his eyes, which had his spirit vision activated, a blonde, red-eyed head had appeared out of the void. In its mouth was a thick letter. Klein faintly caught the scent of milk, wheat, and fish. The corners of his mouth twitched as he secretly reached out his left hand to grab the letter. And sitting in the other 3 seats, Mocked, Rihanna, and Hazel didn't notice anything. Klein stuffed the letter into his pocket without anyone noticing as a waiter walked out of the pantry, serving a new dish to the 4 customers. Among the dishes, 2 of them were butter-fried mushrooms. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly felt disgusted. His expression turned odd as his left palm that remained in his pocket trembled. Thankfully, it's not a mushroom dish I ordered, or else it would have been a waste of a dish. Despite believing that he no longer affected by the trauma inflicted upon him by mushrooms, the smell that came with the letter successfully made him suffer a relapse. Klein's expression rapidly restored itself as he retracted his left hand and placed it on the cup to his side, drinking the ice water inside. Please give me another cup. As though nothing had happened, he turned his head and instructed the waiter who was at the door. At the same time, he pressed down his clothes and slowly got up while expressing his apologies before heading for a bathroom attached to the private room. It was opposite the pantry, placed on either side of the main door. Hiding in a cupboard, Firs heard footsteps approach as the bathroom's door opened and closed. She couldn't help but lean into Xiao's ear and whisper in amusement, "It's the second time. They've been here for slightly more than 30 minutes, and Dwayne Dantès has already gone to the washroom twice. The first time was clearly to pee. If it's for the same reason, it means that this gentleman's kidneys, bladder, or prostate is problematic. He's coming out. He's coming out. He's really only peeing. TSK, he seems to drink plenty of water usually and often heads to the bathroom. Sigh, it's difficult being a tycoon, but it's even more difficult being a good-looking tycoon in particular." Xiao rolled her eyes. "What has that got to do with you? Focus and be serious. We're on a mission. Also, that bodyguard of the Member of Parliament named Mocked seemed pretty strong. He's probably a beyonder. We need to be careful." Firs had no choice but to suppress her desire to chat as she shrank back. They're guarding the area outside without being wary of others passing through the walls. How unprofessional. Alright, we'll chat when we're back. At that moment, Klein had returned to the table and sat back in his seat. He drank a mouthful of ice water, sipped on some white wine, and said to Mocked with a smile, "Having been here in Backland for nearly 2 months, I've been busy getting used to the environment and hadn't found the time to start a new business. Every day I wake up seeing money flowing out without any coming in. Haha, it's about time I do something." He indicated his willingness to participate in the arms dealing by cracking a joke. Mocked stroked his cup and said with a warm smile, "I can empathize with that. In the beginning, I was in such a stage as well. How much money do you have to spare? I can introduce you to some friends for a partnership." Klein replied in a calm tone, "I'll be able to spare a maximum of £20,000 at present." "You're richer than I imagined," Mocked said with a heartfelt sigh. Under normal circumstances, a tycoon who had a liquidity of £20,000 was definitely someone whose overall wealth was on the order of £100,000. Not giving Dwayne Dantès a chance to be humble, he casually said, "Didn't you buy 3% of the Poin company's shares before? You can pledge it for at least £10,000. That will give you some liquidity." Klein immediately smiled and sighed. I have already donated those shares to the church. I plan to establish a bursary foundation that's targeted at the poor. You donated it to the church? Mocked had yet to meet the priests or bishops of St. Samuel Cathedral today. Furthermore, he had been out and had yet to receive the invitation, therefore, he wasn't aware of the new development. Ma'am Rihanna and Hazel, who were enjoying the delicious food, looked up as well, subconsciously casting their gazes at Dwayne Dantès. At their level, it wasn't uncommon to have friends they knew that could donate £10,000, but very few could donate that much in one go. And among these few people, there might not even be one who was willing to donate such amounts. No, there was one now, Dwayne Dantès. Yes. Klein nodded with his usual expression. If not for the goddess's blessings, I would have long died in the chaotic southern continent. And when I was young, if I had the chance to attend school and study, perhaps my life would have been completely different. Thus, I wish to give those children who desire to change their fates some hope. Your character is as amazing as your generosity. Rihanna lowered her cutlery and praised sincerely. Hazel also nodded indiscernibly. The way she looked at Dwayne Dantès turned significantly gentler. Seeing her parents begin an idle conversation over the charity, she excused herself and walked to the bathroom, seemingly pressing her right hand onto her abdomen. When she arrived at the door, she was just about to turn right when she suddenly turned her head and looked at the cupboard beside the pantry. She frowned slightly and revealed a look of confusion before retracting her gaze and opening the washroom's wooden door. When Hazel came out after washing her hands, she had apparently forgotten the abnormality that had happened. She touched the necklace at her chest and returned to the dining table. Dinner came to an end after the dishes and dessert were served. The four left the private room and met the two bodyguards outside with their servants. They were preparing to return home. At this moment, Hazel suddenly paused and said, "I think I dropped my ear studs inside. Sorry about that. Please wait a moment." Without waiting for Ma'am Rihanna to instruct a waitress to do the search, Hazel turned around and circled around the bend, returning to the room she had been in. Hazel lowered her hand that held her left ear and directly entered the connected pantry until she was in front of the cupboard. She then placed her hand on it. She had planned on opening the door to the cupboard at an extremely fast speed, but after some thought, she decided to be cautious by holding on to her necklace with one hand and turning her body sidewards to prevent any sudden attacks from whatever was inside. As she held her breath, Hazel took the chance when the waiter was clearing the table inside to suddenly pull the door open, exposing whatever was inside. However, apart from some spare cutlery and tablecloth, there was nothing. Hazel once again wore a look of puzzlement, as though she couldn't believe the scene before her eyes. I clearly sensed something very valuable inside. She muttered under her breath and quickly closed the door before her maidservant chased up to her and walked out of the pantry. Outside the Intestranzo restaurant, Furs and Zio turned their heads simultaneously and looked inside. That girl actually noticed us? Furs whispered in disbelief and amazement. If she hadn't used door opening and sneaked out from the back of the cupboard, she and Zio would have been discovered, having no choice but to admit that they were secretly protecting Dwayne Dantès. Zio wore a confounded look as well. I remember that you didn't speak or move about when she was heading to the washroom. Perhaps? She's a beyonder as well, and has a certain type of spiritual intuition. Furs made an uncertain guess. Mr. Dwayne Dantès sure leads a difficult life. He often encounters the power struggles between tycoons and nobles while having a butler that secretly studies black magic at home. Furthermore, there are beyonders with mysterious powers living nearby. By the way, what's her name? Hazel. Zaya was looking for Dwayne Dantès' carriage, preparing to hide underneath when her gaze suddenly froze. Furs, look. That person is acting oddly. Furs traced her gaze and saw a middle-aged man in a black formal suit. He was pacing along the sides of the street, looking very anxious and frustrated. How is he acting oddly? Furs didn't have the time to observe him carefully as she directly asked. Zio answered simply, he's dressed as a decent gentleman, but his shoes are very dirty. It's as though he hasn't shined them in a while. As you know, backland is covered in dust. Also, he would touch the area underneath his armpit. I dare bet that there's an underarm holster hidden there. Apart from that, his expression and attitude imply that he isn't normal. They're coming out soon. I'll head to the carriage first. Watch that person and ensure that Mr. Dantès is protected. All right. As Furs found it troublesome, she also found it rather interesting. Hence, she retreated to an area that concealed her as she observed the entrance of the Intestrenzo restaurant. Nearly 30 seconds later, Dwayne Dantès and the mocked family walked out. After bidding each other farewell, they headed for their respective carriages. At this moment, a two-wheeled carriage charged out from the end of the street at an extremely fast speed, as though it would topple at any moment. The horse that pulled the carriage wore a rabid look in its eyes, as though it had been alarmed. It charged for the Intestrenzo restaurant's entrance in its panic. Of Mock's two bodyguards, one went forward in a bid to subdue the runaway horse, while the other protected the Member of Parliament and family. At this moment, the middle-aged man who had been loitering around had approached from the back and drew a revolver. With a warped expression, he aimed at Mock's head. Klein's right hand was raised indiscernibly before he retracted it without doing anything. He nimbly performed a jump, dodging the runaway horse. At the same time, Furs, who was hiding elsewhere, clenched her palm gently and pulled to the side. The assailant's leg suddenly went limp, as though he had stumbled over something, as he fell to the ground, failing to pull the trigger. In his haste, he pressed down with one hand and immediately leaped up, planning to shoot wildly without aiming. However, when he squeezed his finger, he didn't feel any tactile feedback. The revolver had already dropped by Hazel's feet. Following that, he and the runaway horse was subdued by the bodyguards. "Why did you attempt to assault me?" Mock held back his churning emotions as he took a step forward and asked with a deep voice. The middle-aged man immediately laughed as he shouted with a hysterical expression, "It's you. It's all because of you and the others. You talk about atmospheric pollution, wanting things like anthracite. My factory is going bankrupt, my child is dying from an illness, and my wife has committed suicide.